Hello, and thank you for choosing this full length, clean, historical Western romance by Kat Lynn. We are so happy to have you with us today. Before we begin, don't forget to tap the subscribe button and like and share with your friends. Your support allows us to continue sharing these sweet, heartwarming stories for free. Now, relax and get ready to travel back in time to the American frontier, where we join an adventure to find love and happily ever after. Enjoy. Copyright of Kat Lynn, Rekindled Hearts, Rainbow Falls, Book 1, Chapter 1. She crouched in front of the garden, the edge of her dress brushing against the grass as she watched the breeze blow against the flowers that decorated the small patch of land. The soft glow of the sun rested on the green surface all around her, creating a shadow, and she clicked her tongue. Shadow. She didn't like the sound of that, as it reminded her of where she'd been in the last 2 months. Before the last 2 months, she didn't care about doing other things to keep her mind off the pain of dealing with Wright's absence. She never cared about how often the air blew across the grass. But now she seemed to recognize every little detail at the foothills, like the sonorous chirping of the flying birds at the top of the hill or other wildlife that she'd grown to love. Living on the outskirts of town had its benefits. Isolating herself here at the foothills had been a better option in the last month. If anything, she'd rather watch nature than subject herself to the mockery and ridicule of the townspeople who'd been spreading rumors about her since the death of her husband. It was harder to go into town without whispers flying around about how much of a bad luck she was to Wright. The people who used to love and respect her now avoided her like a plague every time she went around town. Their stares and gossip followed her like a leech, and she was tired of keeping her head up high and pretending like their insult to injury wasn't getting to her. She sighed. Where were the people who called themselves her friends? Like a child fascinated by the blue, she stared at the sky, as though it had the power to dispel her heartaches. It didn't work. The pain wouldn't go away, no matter how hard she tried. She reached out to touch it with a finger, but snatched her hand away at the sound of her name and straightened. Hope, what are you doing out here? I didn't think I'd still catch you here. Hey, it was a little hot inside. I just thought to grab some fresh air here. Ain't you meeting Larry this morning? Who knows? Today might be your lucky day. If all goes well, you'd be raking in extra bucks. And maybe you just might never have to work at the alehouse anymore. Hope raised a brow, keeping her hands behind her and plastering a rather forced smile on her face. We both know that wouldn't get you anywhere. I'm just fine. Let's talk about you. You've been in your garden all day, doing Lord knows what. I won't be surprised if you haven't eaten. Reva rested on one hip, folding her arms across her chest, and her eyes followed Hope's hand, lingering there till she uncurled her arms from behind her, letting out a huge sigh. Fine. I've been out here thinking again. Judge me all you want. It's easier to do that, isn't it? You aren't wearing my shoes. Hope returned to her crouching position, backing Reva and staring at nothing in particular. Hey, don't talk like that. I can't see you losing yourself completely and acting like everything is all right. How long do you want to keep this up? If you're not gazing at your flowers all day, you're watching the birds, getting lost in your thoughts, or just staring at nothingness. It's like the Hope I know has disappeared. Yes, I might not be wearing your shoes. I might not know how deep it hurts inside, but I do know one thing, Hope. Wright wouldn't have wanted this for you. She turned to Reva, fresh tears welling up in her eyes, which threatened to break free from her sockets. It was too much. Do you know what they're saying about me? The townspeople. It's on everyone's lips. She's bad luck. He was doing pretty well before she came into the picture. We warned him about her, but he didn't listen, and now look how he ended. Hope opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something else, but she clamped it shut and stared back at the lake. That's not true, and you know it. It's all bull. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe what they're saying is the truth. Why did things suddenly start going south for Wright right after we met? He used to be very successful, but that went down the drain after he met me. His health got worse. I wish he hadn't met me. Maybe he'd be alive now. Stop saying nonsense, Hope. None of these happened because of you. You're a good woman, and I don't care about them all if they think otherwise. It doesn't change a thing. It doesn't change who you are. You're only saying all these things to make me feel better. Look around and tell me who you see. No one. They've all disappeared. I don't have anyone anymore. Gia, Rose, Sandy, Penn, and Lori, they all vanished. But I'm still here. Or maybe you'll leave also, sooner or later. Maybe you're still sticking around because you think I'm pathetic. Reva's brows pulled together, and she seethed, clenching her fists to her side. That's it? You think I'm here with you out of pity? Is that how lowly you think of me? You know what? I've tried. I've tried to get you to look away from them, but you can't see beyond what they think or see. In that case, I'll give you some time to think about all you've said. Straightening, she backed off and walked away, sniffing. Reva, Reva, wait, Hope called after her, running to meet her pace, stopping only when she reached her front. Reva, I'm no better than your other friends. You've made that crystal clear already. I got the message, so please. No, I was mistaken. I didn't mean any of those words, okay? I'm sorry. I spoke in the heat of the moment without thinking. You're the only one who's been with me through thick and thin, Reva. I'm sorry for failing to see how much you care about me. I'm sorry for hurting you. Please, don't leave me. She pulled her into her arms, hugging her tightly and sobbing against her shoulders. Reva returned the hug, wrapping her hands around her waist. You can get through this, Hope. I know you can. No, that's not right. You will. The man I knew as your husband would never want you to wallow in anguish like this. You're Hope Callaghan, and a Callaghan is anything but a coward. You're as tough as your skin. They know this, and that's why they want to pull you down. Don't let them. Hope nodded, wiping her tears from her face. She still had a lot of time ahead of her. You'll start a new life and a family like you've always wanted. You're going to have all the little ones running around while you bake a soothing homemade pie after church on Sunday. You've just got to keep going. I don't know if I can get me a husband after Wright. Don't say that. You're a beautiful young woman, and you've still got a long life ahead of you. You know, maybe you could start by looking around these ads on mail-order brides, or go around more often. Well, I do know the last thing you'd consider is going with me to the alehouse when you've made up your mind to meet someone. Hope let out a broken laugh, and Reva chuckled. Whatever do you have against the alehouse? I ain't gonna throw all the lectures Mama gave me out the window because I met some Reva Thompson. It's not as bad as you think, really. You should come with me one of these days. Folks there aren't like the others in town. Night, you mean? Hope stood and cocked her head, twirling a few strands of her hair. No, thank you. Your choice. Just be happy. That's all I want for you. Hope gave a half smile and swatted Reva's shoulder. Thank you. And Tussity Semeng, for staying with me and being by my side. It means a lot to me. Much to Hope's surprise, she'd given Reva's advice more thought than she'd have ever imagined in the last few weeks. But there was a little problem. She still didn't want to marry someone from town. And unlike before, there seemed not to be any recent advertisements in the newspapers about the need for mail-order brides. She'd looked through some of the newspapers she got in the last few months and discovered after reaching out that all the ranchers and farmers who put out the ads had already found a bride. There had to be someone somewhere in need of a bride. If there wasn't, did that mean she would be forced to go out and meet other men in town? Of course not. Not after the ill reputation the busybodies had given her. As she walked down the bustling street in the early morning, Hope walked with her head up high, ignoring the whispers and side-eyes that trailed her. Since the discussion she had with Reva, she'd somehow managed to silence the inner voices in her head validating the rumors, and they'd noticed. They were aware that there was something different about her. Unlike before, she didn't care about their opinions or disdainful remarks about her. The disappearance of her superficial friends didn't bother her, and somehow, her recent actions seemed to shut them up. She noticed several handfuls of the townspeople had been minding their businesses. Hope stopped in her tracks as she passed by the blacksmith store. Ivory Stewart's wife, Dorcas, was one of the most notorious busybodies in Detroit and seemed more interested in others than her family. As usual, Ivory didn't seem to care about Hope's presence. "Morning, Mr. Stewart," he grunted in reply. "Got nothing to say to me today?" "I haven't seen Dorcas in a while." His grunt was louder this time. "Go away, Hope. I've got more important things to do today." Turning, he barked some orders to his apprentices. It wasn't until he turned away that she noticed the newspaper on a table nearby. "Are you reading that?" He turned, his gaze moving from the newspaper to hers. Then he snorted and grabbed the paper, handing it to her. In a heartbeat, she strode to him and grabbed it, flipping through its pages. "Just take it and leave. I ain't taking it kindly if you step on my toes today." Paying him no attention, she continued searching until her eyes fell on it. Right at the edge of the page was the part she'd been looking for. An ad for a bride. "Rancher Duke Warren wants a bride." Hope's eyes brightened at the other details of the ad. Her heart began to hammer, and she nearly jumped. A grin lit her face. "What are you doing?" "Borrowing this part of your newspaper, Stewart. The last thing that'll ever catch Ivory Stewart's fancy is some ad about someone needing a bride." Hope tore off the ad part of his newspaper before dropping the rest on the table. Stewart raised a brow. "Didn't I tell you to take it all? I need only this. Goodbye, Mr. Stewart, and thank you." He didn't say a word as she left. His brows furrowed and his forehead creased. With a bouncy step, she headed back home. Never in her wildest dreams did she imagine Dorcas Stewart's husband, like, of all people, held the key to her next line of action, Duke Warren. That name was a promise of a new start. She had a letter to write as soon as possible. Chapter 2. Hooves drummed against the floor and shouts rang out. It was chaotic. "Get behind the heifer, Milo. That's one fierce cow if I ever saw one. You don't want those horns by your side." The blonde-haired young cowboy nodded, tugging on the reins of his horse and leading it behind a huge cow that launched at anything in its path. Two other cowboys rode by the side, their ropes twirling in the air, before they came down on the raging cow. They managed to hold it still, and a clear voice kept ringing out in the disarray. Soon, it was all over. The cow was brought under control. Its chest was heaving as different lassos held it down. The men and horses whistled, some taking a few moments to catch their breaths. The man who'd been shouting orders released a long breath he'd been holding for a while running his fingers through his jet-black hair. He gazed into the rugged, sun-crested horizon, where hues of fiery gold painted the sky, before his gaze returned to the cow held under control. "That one's going to give birth to a monster of a bull," he said to another man nearby, grinning. "I can't argue against that, Mr. Warmer. It all happened so suddenly, didn't it?" It certainly did. A couple of minutes ago, they were herding cattle amidst the green plains like any other day. Everything was going as expected. The dust billowed in their wake as they guided the cattle, steering the herd toward a watering hole nestled in the distance. It happened so fast. Without warning, the raging heifer charged at one of the horses, and the chaos began. Thankfully, no one was hurt. "What I want to know is why this cow would be so aggressive all of a sudden," another rancher quipped. Duke turned to the large animal, which snorted as her tail flickered and her ears pinned back. He'd seen this a couple of times before. His spurs clinked as he got down from the horse and walked over to the panting beast. "Well, I reckon she's got herself a bee in her bonnet, or maybe some other critter stirring her up. She'll be fine. Let's wrap up here, boys. I've got to be back in time for dinner." "You're not alone on that, Mr. Warren," Duke chuckled. It was Bob, a brown-haired young cowboy, who patted his horse as he stood nearby. "Got something special waiting for you tonight?" "You bet, Mr. Warren. Deborah is cooking something special." Ah, Bob married a week ago, and he had been all smiles ever since. Duke understood why. The thought of a couple living a good life together brought back memories replaying in his mind, memories that made his heart ache. Clearing his throat, he decided to distract himself. "How did you meet Deborah? She sounds like a wonderful woman." "Mail order." "What?" He raised an eyebrow. "Deborah is a mail-order bride. She wrote to answer something I posted on the paper about finding a wife, since I wanted to marry someone who wasn't from these parts." "That's the rave these days," another cowboy quipped, slapping Bob in the back. "You're a lucky lad, you know." Duke wanted to hear more, but they didn't have all day. Mounting his horse, Duke cinched his saddles tight, preparing his trusty steeds for the ride back. The horses' hooves drummed against the hardened earth as the men guided the cattle back into the ranch. The sun had already dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain by the time Duke was done for the day. The vast horizon had receded from view, and Duke was ready to face the other part of his life that needed him. The weary but satisfied rider returned to the homestead, while whistles rang out from behind him. The last of the livestock was being herded in. The cold evening air began to blow when Duke guided his horse to the stables. He couldn't wait for the warmth of his homestead and the luxury of old Sally's cooking. His stomach rumbled, but he shrugged it off. It wouldn't be long. The dust of the day's cattle drive clung to his worn leather boots when he walked in. The aroma of something sizzling greeted his nostrils, and his lips curled into a wide grin. "I'm home." "Oh, welcome back, Warren," a voice rang from the kitchen. Duke took off his hard boots and took a deep breath. A figure emerged from the kitchen. It was Sally, the graying maid weathered by years of toil, shuffling towards him as he sank into a chair nearby. Her eyes, framed by lines etched from years of squinting, held a familiar earnestness. "Is that dinner I smell, Sally?" She cleared her throat. "Yes, it will be ready soon. Shouldn't you wash first? There's water waiting for you." He groaned. He was so tired that he'd forgotten to wash after the day's toil. "I'll do that now, thank you." He turned to her and noticed she had a thoughtful gaze on her face, her lips pressed together. "Is there anything bothering you?" He'd seen the signs before. Sally had something pressing on her mind. "Warren," she started, her voice hoarse but determined, "I've been thinking about it again." Duke raised a brow, knowing exactly what she meant, though he wished she wouldn't bring it up so often. He sighed. He'd heard it so many times before. "Is it what I think it is? The time has come for me to leave." Duke gritted his teeth at the words. Sally had been with him ever since Minerva died, and although it had just been 4 years, he'd grown used to her presence in the solitude of his home. That presence was about to disappear. "Do you want to leave now? Not today or in a few days, but soon. I'm an old woman, Warren. I'm still thinking of going to spend the rest of my days with my daughter Jane. Life is too short, and I don't want it to pass me by." "I know, but—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I need you here." Moving closer to him, Sally held his hands in her wrinkled ones. "I know you miss Minerva something fierce," she continued, her tone gentle but persistent. "But you're still young, and life ain't meant to be lived alone. I say it's time for you to move forward and find someone to share your days with." The weight of her words was like an anchor for Duke, tethering him to a past he struggled to release. Minerva's absence loomed large in every corner of his heart, a ghostly presence he couldn't shake. Find someone when he couldn't stop thinking of Minerva? The thought seemed absurd. He heaved a deep breath. He hadn't moved on, and he knew it. "I appreciate your concern, Sally," Duke replied, his voice low and gravelly. "But it ain't that simple." Sally's weathered hand rested lightly on his arm. "I know, Duke. I'm not saying it's easy. Just consider it, all right? Life's too short for regrets." He nodded, though the ache in his chest remained. Sally patted his arm before turning back towards the kitchen, leaving Duke alone with his thoughts as a fading candlelight nearby cast long shadows across the room. A part of Duke wondered if Sally was right as he watched her retreating figure. Could there be a future beyond the memories that anchored him to the past? The answer eluded him. Hours had passed. The crackling of fire punctuated the silence that settled within Duke's ranch house. The evening had draped its quiet veil over the land, and the soft symphony of nocturnal insects reverberated through the air. Dinner was over. Duke sat in the dimly lit living room, his gaze fixed on the flickering flame of a nearby candle. Thoughts of Minerva danced like shadows across his mind, and her absence was a constant ache he couldn't shake. It had been that way for 4 years. The memories of her laughter and the warmth of her presence lingered in the very walls of the house they had hoped to build together. A heavy exhale escaped his lips. Perhaps Sally was right. Maybe it was time to consider a different path, one different from the trail of grief he was so familiar with. But where to begin? The idea of looking for someone new was foreign to Duke, like stepping into uncharted territory after years of navigating familiar ground. A flicker kindled within him, even with all the doubts ringing inside. An image surfaced in Duke's mind, that of Bob, the young cowboy, his smile radiant as he spoke of his mail-order bride. He remembered their conversation and the enthusiasm in the cowboy's voice as he shared the brief tale of his courtship. It seemed like a wild notion. Writing to someone far away whom one didn't know and had never seen before? Absurd. Or was it? Now, in the solitude of his home, the idea took root. Wouldn't it be easier to look for a woman who fulfilled her duties without any strings attached, instead of going through the trouble to court someone in town? Maybe that's the way, Duke mused aloud, the sound of his voice breaking the stillness of the room. The prospect of finding a bride through those means appealed even more to him. It gave him a glimmer of hope. He could forge a new connection without the weight of the past bearing down on him. A mail-order bride. He couldn't think of anything better. Duke rose from his chair, taking a deep breath. The decision had been made, like a small spark ignoring within him. With determined steps, he made his way to his desk. As he sat down, he reached for a pen and paper. The flame of the candle cast its warm glow over the parchment as Duke began to write a few words, the first step towards a new chapter in his life. His pen hovered over the paper. With each stroke and each word, Duke conjured a future he hadn't dared to imagine until this moment. He crafted his words carefully, penning details of his life, the sprawling ranch, and the man he was. Placing this advertisement in the newspaper felt like casting a stone into a still pond, rippling outward to alter the course of his life. Sally's voice echoed in his mind. Her advice was a gentle reminder that life was fleeting. Each moment was meant to be embraced rather than endured. The longing for Minerva would forever remain, a bittersweet melody etched into his heart, but the need for someone else who would help set things in order beckoned him forward. With a determined exhale, Duke finished the last line of the advertisement. Folding the paper neatly, he set it aside, ready to be taken to the local newspaper office the next day. As he extinguished the candle's flame, the room plunged into darkness, but a glimmer remained inside him. Everything was about to change. Chapter 3. She'd called this place home for 5 years. Hope moved through the rooms of her late husband's house, her boots creaking on the floorboards as she studied her surroundings. Every so often, she wiped her eyes, which were blurred with tears. Hope was moving on from a part of her life she thought would last until she died. To her, Wright was the one. She'd envisioned a life with him, but here she was, about to move on. Stopping by the curve of the stairs, she took a deep breath. She had to be strong if she wanted to make this work. The past 3 months had passed by in a blur, and what seemed like an idea was becoming reality. She was about to become Duke Warren's wife. She glanced around one more time, her hands moving through random items. She moved from Wright's favorite books on the shelf to the only painting Wright owned, which she couldn't bring herself to sell. Memories lingered in the air, and each item she packed or touched carried the weight of a life she had once known. The laughter, the shared moments, and the love she'd built together with her late husband resided in the past, a bittersweet echo of what had been. The house was almost empty. She'd packed the last of her things beforehand. As she gathered the remnants of her previous life, a pang of loneliness settled in her chest. She could use some company. The absence of familiar faces, so-called friends, who had all scattered like leaves in the wind when her fortunes changed, left a hollow ache in her heart. There was nothing left for her to do. Sighing softly, Hope stepped out onto the porch with a trunk in hand. A wagon waited outside, and its driver was a burly man with a perpetual smile on his thin lips. "Are you ready, ma'am?" She turned, giving the house a lingering gaze. Then she nodded. "I'm ready. Let's go." He helped her with her trunk, placing it in the wagon. Then he helped her up. Getting on, he tugged the reins, and the horse neighed before trotting off. The long journey to Hope's new life had begun. As the wagon made its way into town, her gaze swept over the quiet streets of Detroit. The town, once bustling with life and familiarity for her, now felt distant and detached. With a final wistful glance at the buildings and the people milling about, she turned her eyes away. Her resolve was firm, and wistful thoughts wouldn't help. The carriage ride to the train station was a silent journey. Hope sat still, her thoughts drifting between the past she left behind and the uncertain future awaiting her in Rainbow Falls. The name itself carried a mystique she couldn't decipher. A city in the Wild West, a world so different from her familiar surroundings. The name sounded like one from a fairy tale, and the only thing she knew about the town was that it was different from typical towns in the West, with a remarkable waterfall that gave the town its name. Duke had told her so in a letter, but his description wasn't poetic or creative. It was like he was describing just another part of town. Seeing the waterfall was one thing she could look forward to. That wasn't the only thing on her mind. There were so many questions that lingered in her thoughts, and she wished she had answers. It wasn't lost to her that the answers waited for her at her destination. Arriving at the train station, Hope squared her shoulders, summoning the strength to face the unknown. She glanced at the bustling platform, the rhythmic chug of the steam engine almost deafening. The ticket in her hand was a tether to a future strange to her. "Hope!" A voice rang out, causing Hope to turn. She nearly broke into tears when her eyes met Reva's. They ran into each other's arms. "I knew I'd catch your train if I closed early enough." "Thank you for coming, Reva," Hope said, blinking away tears. "And for everything you've done for me. You stood by me even when nobody else did. I'll never forget that." "Oh, don't worry about it. Your husband helped my family, and I can never repay that. But you're my friend, and I can at least stand by you. I'll miss you dearly." They embraced once more, and tears fell from Hope's eyes. "I'll miss you too, Reva." The blare of the train cut their goodbye short. They pulled apart, and Reva handed Hope the trunk she'd lifted from the floor. "Here, your new life is waiting for you." Hope wiped the tears from her face before taking the duffel. Taking a deep breath, she boarded the train. Before she'd fully entered, she turned and waved at Reva, who waved back. Entering the train, she found a seat by the window. As the wheels began to turn and the landscape outside blurred into motion, Hope made a silent vow to embrace this new chapter with an open heart. The name Duke Warren echoed in her thoughts, a man she had never met yet who was to be her new husband. She clung to the anticipation of starting afresh, her thoughts shifting from the emptiness of her past to the possibilities of the life waiting for her in Rainbow Falls. From his letters, Duke didn't seem like the romantic type. His message was clear. He needed someone to support him while he ran his ranch. Hope didn't know what to expect. She'd heard and read about ranches, but never visited one. But she could only hope she was the companion Mr. Warren needed. She would try her best in this new life, entwined with a stranger named Duke. Chug! The train's horns blared like a weary sigh, the culmination of a long, arduous journey as it rolled into Rainbow Falls' outpost. Hope's eyes shot open and she blinked. Then she yawned and stood, clutching her trunk. She stepped onto the platform, her eyes scanning the bustling scene for a sign of the man she was destined to call her husband. The outpost was crowded, and she couldn't spot any man who matched the only photograph he sent her a month ago. She glanced at the fading brown photograph. His clear eyes and the beards that bordered his defined jaws were distinct, but he was nowhere in sight. Minutes passed, and there was still no sign of him. Her heart began to throb. Where was he? Various thoughts flashed through her mind, and she tried her best to shut them out. Here she was, in a strange town in the West. She didn't know what to do, and her eyes scanned the wooden platform. He had to be here somewhere, and then her eyes met blue ones. Amidst the crowd, a figure stood taller than everyone and composed, his demeanor exuding a quiet strength. His jet-black hair made him stand out, but it was those clear eyes and that defined jaw, clean-shaven now, that made her recognize him immediately. Duke, she presumed, was a man of few words. He strode toward her, and her heart hammered, this time for a different reason. She swallowed. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and measured, "you must be Hope." She offered a polite nod, a faint smile gracing her lips. "Yes, I am. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Warren." Duke's response was a simple nod. He wasted no time with pleasantries, his gaze flickering towards the horizon as if eager to depart. "Everything is set for us to head out. Are you ready?" Duke inquired, his tone polite but tinged with urgency. "Yes, I'm ready," Hope replied, gathering her resolve. Despite his reserved nature, Hope found herself admiring the undeniable handsomeness that marked his features. With a brief exchange of nods, Duke led the way. The silence between them settled as they walked towards a small wagon. She stole glances at him, wondering why he didn't talk too much. Was there an underlying reason, and how would she relate to such a reserved person? Chapter 4. Where are we going now? Duke turned to the woman sitting by him. Ever since he saw her for the first time, he'd tried his best not to stare. It wasn't as easy as he had hoped. Her hair was packed into a bun, but some strands of long, striking curls, more golden than blonde, escaped the bundle and shielded her face partly. Her eyes met his, and for a moment their clear brown brilliance drew him in. He closed his eyes and opened them, trying his best to focus. "To the town hall. We'll get married there." Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She faced the road, but Duke didn't miss the creasing of her brows. Did he say something? Duke wondered what he said to get her that way. Was it about getting married immediately? "Is there something you want to say?" She drew a deep breath before releasing it in a sigh. Duke raised a brow and was about to ask once more. "No, nothing." Duke kept quiet. If Hope wanted to remain silent, then so be it. He'd been corresponding with her for 3 months, and more than a dozen letters had been passed within that time. He'd made his intentions clear from the beginning, and he didn't want to waste any time once she got back. He'd originally wanted to wed in a church, but changed his mind. Minister John Parrish was the type of minister who insisted on a ceremony, and he didn't want that. Sighing inwardly, Duke tugged at the reins. They were close to the town hall. Sitting here, he uttered a silent prayer. Was Hope the right choice for him? Ever since a letter that turned out to be Hope's response to his newspaper post was delivered, he'd made what he wanted clear. So far, he hadn't regretted his choice. Hope was quiet, and she didn't seem like the kind of woman to give him any trouble. She couldn't compare to Minerva, but at least she agreed to his terms, and that was enough. He knew it was too early to be making comparisons, but he couldn't help it. Please, let this be the right choice. This marriage was a transaction, but a bad transaction would set him back. He'd come a long way. He didn't even think much about marriage before Sally encouraged him to try, and he needed a helper, not a romance. He wasn't asking too much, was he? Duke stole another glance at Hope. Her eyes moved about, and it was evident she had some questions. They'd come back to that. Marriage first. The sun hung low in the sky as Duke guided the wagon toward the town hall, the largest building in town. Getting down, he walked over to her to help her down as well. His hand rested lightly on hers. She didn't turn away. He considered withdrawing his hand but decided against it. That wasn't a romantic gesture. He meant to offer reassurance without quite bridging the growing chasm between them. Thus was all happening in a rush, and very soon their union would be sealed in the blink of an eye, yet he couldn't shake the weight of responsibility that settled on his shoulders. Inside the weathered building, the ceremony was swift. The words of the officiant barely registered as Duke held Hope's gaze. A flicker of a frown crossed her face, but she held herself so well it impressed him. The official read a few lines before giving the go-ahead for the vows. Duke swallowed before reading his lines. The exchanges were a formality. The air was thick, and he took a deep breath while Hope read hers. There was an unspoken understanding between Duke and Hope. This was a marriage born of necessity, not affection. "Do you take Duke Warren to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Hope smiled, and for a reason Duke didn't understand, it warmed his heart. "I do. And you?" The official turned to me, a smile curling his thin lips. "Do you take Hope Callaghan to be your lawfully wedded wife?" He nodded. "I do." It was done. The wedding was quicker than Duke could have imagined, just as he wanted it. There was no time for festivities. This wedding was a transaction, and he intended to keep it that way. As they emerged into the dusty street, Duke glanced sidelong at Hope. Her beauty was striking. Her features were delicate, yet imbued with a quiet strength. The urge to draw her close warred with his determination to maintain a respectful distance. Instead, he cleared his throat and gestured toward the main thoroughfare, which had buildings lining each side. He would show her around town later. "Let's head to my ranch." The words were out of his mouth before he could understand what he just said. He referred to the ranch as his. Shouldn't he have just said home? He watched to see if she'd react to what he just said. Her face was straight, and her smile was still on her face. She turned to him and nodded. "I'd like that." He heaved a sigh. He was thinking too much about this. She wasn't even bothered. Helping her onto the wagon once more, he joined her, and they continued their journey onward. Dusk was already starting to fall. As the wagon made its way through the dusty streets, the two sat in silence. Duke thought of what to say to break the silence. It was awkward, too awkward. They were already husband and wife, yet he didn't even know what to say to her. He didn't like the stiffness between them. Clearing his throat, he decided to make conversation. "How are you feeling now?" Almost immediately, he bit his lips. That wasn't a good way to start a conversation. "To be honest, I'm quite hungry. I haven't eaten anything in almost a day. I could use a good meal." He faced her, noticing her smile had widened. As if on cue, her belly rumbled. He stifled a chuckle, managing to convert it to a cough instead. Maybe that question turned out to be a good one after all. Minerva was reserved, and Duke was used to that. He didn't expect Hope to be so open. "Me too. I think we can make do with supper." "What would you like?" He raised a brow. "Why?" "I was thinking of making something for dinner when we got back, but I don't know what you'd like." He shook his head. "There's no need for that. Sally's still around." "Who's Sally?" "Right. He didn't mention his maid. She's the one who helps around. She makes my meal, cleans the house, and does other chores around the ranch." "Oh, I can't wait to meet her. You will soon enough." Hope lapsed into silence, and that uncomfortable tension between them returned. It didn't last long. Her eyes were alight when she spoke. "I'd love to help around as soon as I can. It would be nice, wouldn't it? That's why I married you." "Yeah, it would." Duke found himself drawn to her infectious enthusiasm, the corners of his lips twitching into a small smile despite his resolve. Yet he decided to maintain a careful distance, as the unspoken boundaries between them became more defined with each step. It was a dance of courtesy and restraint, and it was imperative to navigate this new union with cautious respect. Somewhere in a deep part of Duke's mind, he felt a twinge of guilt for the haste of it all. Maybe Hope deserved something more. He shrugged it off. He was overthinking it again. She wasn't even complaining. Duty and honor had dictated the necessity of this union, and he would see it through, even as the brief attraction between them lingered unspoken in the dry western air. It could just be him. Soon they were almost at the town's outskirts. The road had grown rough and rocky, and the wagon began to wobble. They'd pulled closer to the ranch, and it was just in the distance. Duke pointed to the horizon. "The ranch is just over there." Hope's lips fell open slightly. The sun had all but disappeared beyond the horizon, painting the sky a golden brown. The fields were greener out of town, and the green seemed to roll on forever. The sight is beautiful. He couldn't disagree. Soon, a whitewashed house, about 2 stories tall, came into view. There were other buildings further away from the house, and some figures were on the fields. With every drudge, they drew closer. Soon, they were at the wooden gates. A cowboy waiting by the gate nodded upon seeing them and swung the gate open. "Welcome to the ranch." It was the beginning of something new for Duke. He could only hope he wouldn't regret bringing Hope to his ranch. "Do you have a stable?" For the first time, he chuckled. "Yeah, where else would I keep the horses?" "I'd love to see it." Duke nodded. "You can. For now, you should freshen up. You had a long journey." They disembarked, and Duke led Hope into his house. He whispered something to the cowboy before walking in with Hope. As they stepped through the threshold of the homestead, Sally, Duke's loyal housekeeper, bustled forward with a warm smile that seemed to thaw the tension in the air. "Welcome, dears," she said, turning to Hope, her eyes twinkling under their wrinkles. "Good evening, Sally. This is Hope. She'll be staying with me from this moment on." Sally turned to face Hope, with her smile never diminishing, holding the younger woman's hand in her wrinkled ones. It's so good to meet you, Hope. I've got your room all ready for you, and I've prepared a bath for you as well. Dinner will be ready before you know it. Hope returned the smile as she followed Sally to her quarters. Duke lingered in the hallway, watching the exchange. When they disappeared up the stairs, he sank into a chair and heaved a sigh. The day had been a long one. Duke waited for Hope to settle down. He bid Sally goodbye once dinner was ready and the table was set. It was the last time she would be helping with his chores. "Goodbye, ma'am. Thank you for everything you've done for me." Chuckling, she shook her head. "Don't say it that way, dear. I'm not leaving for good. I'm only going to stay with Jane in town." "I understand," he smiled. "Please visit whenever you can." "Of course. Have a good night now." She came closer, holding his hands in hers. "Take care of yourself and Hope. She's a good woman. I just know it. You can still have what you had with Minerva. Don't let go of the chance." He nodded. It was almost impossible for him to see Hope that way, but Sally was just looking out for him. It didn't matter if he didn't agree with her. With that, Sally stepped out. The wait continued for Duke. Once Hope had settled in, she came downstairs for dinner. He had a hard time taking his eyes off her. They ate in silence. After dinner, Duke approached Hope. His face was straight as he motioned for her to join him in the sitting room. "I think we need to talk." Duke's voice was measured yet firm. He settled into a worn armchair, his gaze fixed on Hope, who sat across from him, her posture composed. The smile on her face made it harder for him to keep his lips pursed, but his face remained straight anyway. "Do you know why I married you?" She hesitated for a few moments. "Because you needed a wife?" "I want to make something clear," Duke continued, his voice steady. "I married you for practical reasons. This ain't about feelings or romance. I need help around the house while I'm tending to the livestock and managing the land. That's all there is between us." Hope didn't flinch. She met his gaze with a nod, her composure unwavering. It seemed she had expected as much. Prosody. He'd made it clear their union was rooted in necessity rather than affection from the start, after all. "I understand. I'll do my part in keeping the house in order and assisting where needed." While she spoke, her eyes flickered, dropping for a moment before returning to how they were. Duke didn't miss it. His conscience pricked him, but he steeled himself against it. Their circumstances were practical. She'd lost her husband, and he lost his wife. They would help each other out. That was all. "I'm glad you understand. Good night now." With a nod, Duke excused himself. He couldn't deny the emptiness that lingered within him, but he had his duty. He could only hope she was what he was looking for. Chapter 5. Hope awoke to the first light peeking through the curtains, rubbing her eyes as she sat up. Her mind was blurry, but it wasn't long before she regained her senses. Duke. She glanced around, a part of her expecting to see him. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was. Duke had given her a room of hers. Even though she didn't see anything wrong with sleeping apart from him due to how peculiar their marriage was, her mind still lingered on the idea of commemorating their marriage in some way. They were husband and wife, after all. A smile lit her face. The vibrant feast that had celebrated her union with Wright danced at the edges of her thoughts. She could still remember the church ceremony and the dream wedding dress she got from her mother. That was long ago. She swiftly pushed the reminiscing thoughts aside. Dwelling on the past was futile. She had to face the future. Stretching, she got out of bed. It was her first full day in her new life as Duke Warren's bride, and there was so much to get acquainted with. As she dressed, the notion of marking this new chapter in her life tugged at her. She couldn't shrug it off. Why couldn't they mark their marriage? Perhaps a simple celebration would go a long way. Why didn't she think of asking him yesterday? The answer was evident. She had a hard enough time grappling with the reality of her marriage to Duke. It happened so fast she would have missed it if she had blinked. That was yesterday, and this was a new day. She'd ask him today. A small wedding feast could build a sense of unity, or at least a semblance of acknowledgement for their union. Was he gone? Her steps quickened as she made her way downstairs, catching sight of Duke preparing to head out of the door and to the ranch. He stopped as the floorboards squeaked under her feet, turning to her. His arched brows creased. Even in a rugged coat and pants, he still looked as amazing as ever. She stopped when his piercing aqua stare met hers. "Duke," she hesitated. "Morning. Good morning. I'm about to head out. Do you need anything?" "No." He shrugged and turned to leave. "Wait." He stopped. "What's the matter, Hope?" "I was thinking about something." He waited, crossing his hands. "Our marriage," she continued, her voice a little quieter than usual. "I was thinking maybe we could have a small feast to celebrate our marriage. It could be a way to bring some cheer to our new beginning." Duke's expression was unreadable for a moment before settling into a stern mask, his lips pursing and his brows furrowing. "I can't do that." Her shoulders fell. Taking a deep breath, she decided to go on further. "Why? I ain't one for festivities, Hope. That's not how I do things," he replied, his tone firm and laced with a note of finality. Her heart sank at his response, the rejection cutting deeper than she had expected. She had hoped for a sliver of understanding. Was it too much to ask for a willingness to acknowledge their marriage, even if in a simple way? The realization that he didn't see their union as important stung, and a sharp pang stabbed her chest. She bit her lips before taking a deep breath. "I understand," she murmured, her voice low. "That's good." With a forced smile, she added, "I'll tend to the chores around the house then." "Thank you. I'll be back by evening." With those words, Duke nodded and left. As he departed, Hope stood in the silence that settled over the homestead. Thoughts ran through her head like a twister. It was true she had married out of necessity, hoping for a chance at stability, but his dismissal of the idea of celebration left her questioning her decision. It was just a small feast she wanted to consummate their wedding. Even though it was conditional, she was married to Duke. There could have been some way to mark the occasion, or so she thought. How wrong she was. That troubling thought settled on her shoulders as she went about her tasks, and the emptiness of the house echoed her unease. Doubt crept in, weaving through her thoughts as she wondered if this union was indeed the right choice. Had she perhaps traded one form of solitude for another? With Duke, would she be even lonelier than before? As the day unfurled, Hope busied herself unpacking and getting accustomed to Duke's rustic ranch house. The dwelling held the essence of the West, like the books she had read. Aged timber walls bore the marks of time, while sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting warm, honeyed hues upon the worn wooden floors. The hearth held memories of countless fires, and the lingering scent of wood smoke wafted through the rooms, creating a rustic yet somewhat comforting ambiance. Amidst the settling of her belongings, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Hope straightened, smoothed down her skirt, and made her way to the living room. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, she went to the door. It couldn't be Duke. He wouldn't knock if he came back. It was his house, after all. Her eyes met a kind old face she had only recently grown acquainted with, old Mrs. Sally stood on the porch with a twinkle in her eyes, a wide smile brightening her face, and a basket of fresh eggs in her weathered hands. "Good afternoon, dear. I thought I'd bring over some eggs for your first full day here," Sally said. Hope's lips curled into a smile. "Thank you, ma'am. That's very kind of you. Please come in. I made some cookies earlier. I could make us some tea." "That would be delightful." Sally settled into the cozy sitting room, her eyes scanning her surroundings. She nodded before turning to Hope. "Well done, dear. You're already making this place more of a home." Hope's cheeks colored. "Thanks, ma'am. Just hold on. I'll be back." Retreating to the kitchen, she grabbed the apron she had discarded a while ago and tied it around her. Then she got to work, placing a kettle filled with water on the stove. After she served the cookies on 2 plates, she waited for the water to boil. All the while, she kept wondering why Sally came visiting. It was clear from yesterday that Sally was more than just a maid, and she seemed like she knew Duke a lot. An idea came to her. She wanted to know more about her husband. What if Sally told her all she needed to know? It wasn't long before the kettle began to whistle, and soon she made tea as well. Once all was served, she carried the wooden tray with the cups and plates and made her way to the living room. "Sorry for the wait. Mrs. Sally, I got your cookies and tea right here." Hope placed Sally's servings on the table and took a seat near her. The old woman flashed her a warm grin. "Thank you so much, dear," she said, before taking a bite out of a cookie. "My, this is well done. Where did you learn to bake this well?" "My mama taught me well, I guess. I wonder if Duke will like it." "Oh, he'll love it. Duke loves anything baked. Minerva was as good as you are, and he loved her for it. I taught her a few tricks I knew, the same way Rhonda, my closest friend, and her mother showed me." Hope turned, her eyes widening. The moment was perfect. "I heard about Minerva. I'm very sorry. How was Duke after everything? It must have been hard." Sally gazed into the fireplace. Then she began to paint a picture of a man changed by tragedy. After his first wife passed, Duke has been a solitary figure round these parts. He's a good man, but he keeps to himself. It'll take time for him to open up, if ever. Prosedeliant. Hope listened intently, her heart softening at the revelation. She understood a little why he was so reserved. His reclusiveness began to make sense, and a longing tugged at her. She wondered if she could breach the walls he had erected around his heart and if he would ever let her in. She also wondered if she'd try to breach those walls. Sally placed a comforting hand on Hope's, her gaze steady. "Be patient with him, dear. Sometimes it takes a gentle touch and a lot of time for a man like Duke to let someone in again." Did Sally read her mind? Hope nodded. She appreciated the advice. It would be a challenge to find her way through the intricacies of her marriage with Duke, especially with his guarded heart concerned. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll do my best," Hope replied softly. Hope and Sally continued to talk about other topics relating to Duke and his ranch. And Sally told Hope all she knew about the Warren Ranch. All the while, Hope's mind was on one thing, getting Duke to open up to her. How would she achieve that? Duke wasn't willing to move on from Minerva, and Hope could understand how hard starting anew after sharing something so deep with someone was. She sighed inwardly. They had to. They were a couple now. Another question bothered her. Why was she thinking of getting Duke to open up? "It's just so we can relate better as partners." Yes, that's it. Hours had passed, and the sun had reached its peak position in the sky. It was time for Sally to leave. As the old woman bid her farewell and departed, Hope found herself gazing out at the vast expanse of the rugged landscape beyond the window. It wouldn't be an easy journey, but she would be patient and offer understanding and warmth. Maybe one day Duke might let her into his solitary world. Until then, she had a lot to do. Chapter 6. "I've got a feeling these calves will fetch a good price when they're all grown. What do you think, Mr. Warren?" Jolted out of his thoughts by the question, Duke groaned. Knowing it wouldn't be enough, he sighed and turned to Bob, who asked, "You're right. They look sturdier than the rest." "Is everything all right, Mr. Warren?" Duke leaned by the wooden railings of the corral. "Everything's dandy. If you say so. I just can't wait to get out of here." A corner of Duke's lips curled up. "Deborah, eh? A man needs his woman after such a long day, that's for sure." And what a long day it had been. Rustling the cattle was a normal task, but ever since the land around the nearest waterhole was claimed by the timber mill, the cattle had to be moved to another farther from the ranch. Duke had been riding all day, shouting orders and whistling at the top of his voice. His voice was almost hoarse, and his hands ached from swinging lassos all day. It was one of those days at the ranch, the kind that left a man bone-tired and wearied to the core. To make matters worse, the sun had borne down relentlessly. The cattle were as stubborn as ever, and the task seemed never-ending. Dust coated every inch of Duke, clinging like a second skin, as if the very land itself conspired to remind him of the toils he had to endure. "I agree. Speaking of that, how's your wife?" Duke's thoughts traveled to Hope. What would she be doing at that moment? He could guess. She was probably doing her chores, preparing dinner, or reading a book. Last night, he'd seen her reading. When he inquired, Hope told him about her love for books and tales. He smiled. That was something they had in common. He wondered what else they had in common. Bob nudged him by the shoulder, cutting his thoughts short. "You're smiling. It's such a good feeling, ain't it?" "The sun will set soon," Duke said, staring at the sky and changing the topic. "I'm riding back. You can tidy up things here with the other men. We'll see tomorrow." Bob nodded, and Duke got onto his horse. The stallion began galloping at full speed to the stables. After putting his horse in the stables for the night, he began to trudge back to the homestead. The stress of the day magnified each step he took. As he got nearer, he spotted a figure sitting on the porch. The sight of Hope, her gaze fixed on the horizon, brought a flicker of solace amidst the weariness. He didn't know why, but his tense muscles calmed. She glanced up as he approached and stood, her brows creasing. "Rough day?" Her voice was soft and soothing. He grunted in response, too tired to utter words that could adequately describe the toil he went through that day. Without a word, he settled beside her. The worn wooden steps offered a fleeting respite. I had to find a new water hole for the cattle. Any further, and we might just have to go to the waterfall. "What happened to the last one?" He threw his head back. "The last one isn't open to us anymore. It's hard driving a herd of very stubborn animals another mile or two from their former drinking spot, but I don't have a choice." "That sounds like work. Would you like to go take a bath? There's warm water available for you." He turned to her, a smile curling his lips. A man could get used to this. "I don't mind if I do." Rising to his feet, he went off to bathe. True to her word, Hope had prepared warm water for him. She'd also prepared clean clothes for him. A grin lit his face. He hadn't expected Hope to be so thorough. After washing off the dust and grime that coated him, he felt refreshed. Donning his change of clothes, he made his way back inside. A comforting aroma wafted to him, and his mouth watered. Dinner. Hope had already set the table by the time he reached the dining table. Chicken soup, vegetables, and fresh bread lay waiting for him. Hope waved to one of the 4 chairs by the round table, and she took the one opposite him. As was the tradition with Duke, he ate in silence. Hope seemed to have figured it out, as she didn't say a word either. After dinner, Hope stood to tidy the plates. Duke stood with her, grabbing his plates. "Let me help." She shook her head, smiling. "You don't have to. I'll be done in no time." "I insist." He held her gaze until she looked away. She nodded, and they went to the kitchen together. He stole glances at her as they cleaned the plates together. Her smile remained on her face, but he noticed the corners of her lips were twitching. Once, her eyes met his. Without warning, she burst into laughter. "What?" he asked, chuckling. "Nothing. I'm sorry," she said in between bouts of laughter. He joined in, even though he didn't know what made her laugh. By the time they finished, he noticed his fatigue had diminished. Something came to mind, and he turned to her. "Should we spend some time outside? I could use some air." "I'd love to." Together, they made their way outside. The evening air held a faint chill as they settled on the bench. They sat that way in silence for minutes, and Duke searched his mind for what to say. He didn't have to. Hope turned to him, and her gaze gentle. "Why don't you like feasts and parties?" Her question cut through the silence, unexpected yet lingering. He paused, grappling for an answer that didn't reveal too much and kept the walls he'd built intact. He couldn't get too close. "Why are you asking?" Duke hoped the question wasn't as defensive as it sounded. "My birthday is in a little over 2 weeks. Right, my former husband always threw me a party. It was a way of marking the occasion and celebrating another year. It wasn't just my birthday. We celebrated every memorable occasion. I was just wondering why you don't do the same." The mention of her former husband stirred something unfamiliar within him. Clenching and unclenching his fists, he shifted uneasily. "It's a waste of time and resources," he muttered, his voice gruff. "Ain't something I see the point of." Hope's smile faltered for a moment, a fleeting shadow passing over her features. Then it disappeared, and her gaze turned towards the horizon once more. The silence between them stretched. Duke wrestled with the conflicting emotions swirling within, guilt for denying her a simple request and the need to shield himself from vulnerabilities that threatened to surface. Feasts and parties were examples of such. The sky began to darken, with the first stars peeking through the dusky canvas above. He felt her eyes on him, a weighty silence settling between them. But in that quiet moment, as the world around us faded into shades of twilight, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that maybe he had denied her something meaningful. She was trying her best so far, and he had to concede that. "Does this mean we aren't going to celebrate anything? We didn't celebrate our wedding, and we won't celebrate my birthday. So does this mean we can't celebrate anything else? We can, but we won't be having any feasts. It's a waste of time and money. That's a selfish way to think. In the wake of Hope's searing remark, a silence thicker than the dusk enveloped them, her words cutting through the evening air like a blade. The sting lingered, settling in the hollows of his chest, an ache he couldn't quite ignore. Selfish? What's the use of celebrating something important in our lives if we can't share it with others? Why was it so hard for her to understand? Duke sighed. It didn't matter. That's not how I do things. She stood, placing her hands on her hips. Her gaze was almost piercing. I wish I never married a man who doesn't even care about his wife's birthday. For a moment, he sat frozen. The hurt in her eyes mirrored a deeper ache within him, a pang of guilt and the unmistakable sting that followed. He stood as well. He had to be strong. He couldn't bring himself to voice the turmoil within. I've told you, I can't. That's final. With those words, he retreated into the solace of the house. With the last glimpse he caught of Hope, he noticed her frown faltering and her eyes softening. Alone in the confines of his room, the memories of Duke's former wife flooded his thoughts. An ache reverberated through the chambers of his heart. Minerva had been a gentle soul. She understood the tranquility he sought, and a companion who had embraced the quietude of their life together. Her absence was a void that time had failed to fill, and it left a lingering ache that was a constant companion. The ache returned with greater force that evening. Minerva had never asked for grand gestures or frivolous celebrations, but instead found contentment in the simple joys of life. That sentiment resonated deeply with Duke. As he sat in the dim light of the lantern by his bed, he realized something that made his heart sting. The chasm between Hope and himself was growing more apparent. For a moment, he doubted his resolve. The ache in his chest lingered. Hope's words had hit him harder than he expected, and as the night wore on, so did the thoughts. Had marrying Hope been a mistake? The question echoed within the recesses of Duke's mind. She was a good help so far, as he'd envisioned, but her spirited nature was a stark contrast to the tranquil existence he had known. That difference was casting a long shadow on their union. Chapter 7. The sun was already out, and its rays poked through the openings in the curtain. Hope awoke with a sense of remorse lingering in the depths of her being. The weight of her words from the previous evening sat heavily on her heart, with the sharpness of her remark carving an ache she couldn't shake off. A cloud had descended over her thoughts, and one thing tugged at her. She needed to make amends for last night. She didn't mean to be so rude to him. Heaven knows what came over. Sighing, she covered her face with her hands. Duke's face after what she said made her heart sting. Those blue, expressive eyes showed hurt. She didn't mean what she said, but she couldn't take it back. As she considered ways to apologize to Duke for her harshness, a flicker sparked within her. An idea came to mind. She decided to extend an olive branch in the form of a meal. She would prepare a special dinner. Maybe the dinner could help bridge the widening gap between them. God help me. Stepping out of bed, she began to get ready for the day. Yet when she emerged from her room, her steps filled with resolve, she found the house unusually quiet. Duke had left. The absence of his presence was palpable. She bit her lips as the realization dawned on her. He had left without a word, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than any conversation they had shared. Like yesterday. With her shoulders sagging, Hope made her way to the kitchen. Grabbing a bucket, she stepped outside and headed to the well. She could catch the faint echoes of calling in the distance, and a part of her wanted to leave her chores behind and go over to Duke. She decided against it. If there was one thing she'd already learned, it was that Duke was a very busy man. Interrupting his duties would hurt instead of help. Fetching some water, she went about her chores. She'd wanted to apologize that morning, but missed the chance. It didn't matter. Undeterred, she set about preparing for the evening, determined to salvage what remained of the day. The kitchen became her sanctuary, the clatter of pots and pans a comforting rhythm amidst the whirlwind of emotions churning within her. The day passed by in a blur. After Hope was done with her chores, she set about her special task of the day. In the kitchen, she crafted a meal with meticulous care. She hoped it would convey the apology she couldn't find words for. The aroma of savory dishes filled the air, mingling with a faint, husky scent that lingered in every corner of the homestead. The smell of the West, she once heard Duke call it. That didn't matter to her now. Very soon, the golden sun began its descent beyond the horizon, and its dimming rays were replaced with orange glows from lanterns that bounced off every corner. Hope set the table with precision, with each place meticulously arranged. If this wasn't good enough as a silent plea for understanding and forgiveness, she didn't know what was. The setting was ready. The dark of evening settled upon the homestead, and the quietude of the house enveloped Hope as she awaited Duke's return. She waited for a long while, but there was no sign of him. Sitting, she fiddled with the hem of her dress. Time was ticking away. What if he arrived too late? What if all her efforts went unnoticed? Her attempt at reconciliation was left hanging in the silence of the empty dwelling. Yet, amidst the faint glimmers of fading hope, she held on to the belief that perhaps her gesture might carry the message she wanted. She was sorry for yesterday. And as she sat alone at the table she had meticulously prepared, the soft flicker of candlelight casting shadows on the walls, she clung to the faint hope that someday they might find a way to bridge the distance that had grown between them. Maybe that day was today. Just as that thought came to mind, the distant sound of Duke's footsteps approaching the porch stirred Hope to the present. She stood, welcoming him with a soft smile as he entered the homestead. "Hey," she said, her voice carrying a gentle warmth. "I made dinner and a bath for you. You must have had a tough day." Duke hesitated, his usual reticence more pronounced, but he nodded in acknowledgement. The air between them was charged with unspoken words, a tension that lingered as they settled at the table for the meal she had prepared. Hope waited patiently until Duke had bathed and was ready for dinner. When he arrived, she simply directed him to the table. He didn't say a word as he sat down for dinner. Amidst the quiet ambiance of their dinner, Hope seized the moment. There wouldn't be a better time to extend an olive branch. "I wanted to apologize for my words yesterday. I was out of line," she said, her gaze fixed on her plate. Duke looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a softened gaze that held a glimmer. "There's no need. I should have been more patient. I'm sorry as well." The tension eased, and the remainder of the meal passed in silence. Hope heaved a sigh when it was all over. As dinner drew to a close, Hope caught Duke glancing at her from the corners of her eyes. As if on cue, he cleared his throat. "Thanks for tonight." Something in his voice struck a chord within her. They'd cleared the table, and now they stood facing each other by the doorway. In the fleeting intimacy of the moment, an unspoken connection crackled in the air between them. She swallowed, and something tugged at their hearts. One glance led to another, and they drew closer. The space between their breaths got closer until their proximity threatened to dissolve the distance altogether. Hope leaned forward with the pull of an unspoken desire drawing her in. She gave in to a longing for closeness that had been building within her, a longing she wasn't even aware was there. Their lips hovered mere inches apart. His hands moved to her face. But as their breaths mingled in the hushed quietude, Duke hesitated. He withdrew abruptly, leaving Hope bewildered and questioning the sudden halt. Her heart hammered against her chest. "What happened?" "Duke," she murmured, searching for an explanation in the depths of his guarded eyes. "Good night, Hope." With those words, Duke retreated to his room, leaving Hope standing in the wake of their unfinished moment. A tumult of emotions churned within her, and the abrupt withdrawal cast shadows of doubt across her thoughts. With a sigh, Hope eventually made her way to her room. Her steps were tentative as she pushed the door open. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting a soft glow on the bed. The evening's events bore on her mind. Her thoughts wandered, pondering the implications of her marriage to a man so deeply entrenched in his solitude. Hope tossed and turned as the night wore on, lost in her thoughts. Could she thrive in a life bound to a man whose walls seemed impenetrable and whose solace in silence was a stark contrast to her yearning for connection and companionship? She placed a hand on her chest, feeling her pulse race. What bothered her even more than all that was her growing attraction to him. The thought troubled her. Chapter 8. The horse tugged along the busy streets of town, dragging the wagon along on its journey back to the ranch. Duke slapped the reins, urging it faster. He'd risen early. The sun hadn't poked its head out of the clouds when he stepped out, as the day was looking to be a long one. The early bird gets the worm, as his mother used to say. His eyes blinked shut for a moment before he forced them open to focus on the road. He yawned. He hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. It was hard enough going through each day. He couldn't afford to do it tired. It was too early. He glanced around, trying to distract himself. He could already get a glimpse of the town hall near the sheriff's office. Just over a week ago, he'd begun a new journey in that wooden building. His thoughts drifted to Hope and the night before. They'd settled their differences, thank God for that, and he had to admit he enjoyed the supper she prepared very much. What wouldn't leave his mind, however, was what happened after. He heaved a long, slow sigh. What was that? For a moment, he'd been so tempted to hold her close and plant a kiss on her lips. For a moment, he got lost in that gaze of hers. Why did he pull back? She didn't seem to be against the idea of kissing him. She'd leaned in herself, even. She wasn't the problem. It was him. Hope was his wife. He had the right to hold her and kiss her. Yet he knew he couldn't. From the beginning, he told her he married her to help him. It was more of a mutual agreement. Yet there he was, his eyes still blinking shut at intervals because he had a sleepless night thinking about her. This new attraction bothered him. The wagon's wheels raised little puffs of dust as he inched closer to the ranch. Duke still couldn't stop thinking of Hope and what would have happened if he'd taken that step. He hadn't been with a woman since Minerva. After all, he loved her so much he thought he would spend the rest of his years with her. Now here was he, with another woman as his bride, a very attractive one at that. She was more beautiful than Minerva, no doubt. His heart sped up as an image of her lips on his came to him. He tried to shut it out, but her face failed to leave his mind. Duke's eyes were drawn to the saloon across a corner of the street, but he shook his head. He wanted to forget, but the last thing he would do was drink. He'd made a vow, no liquor would ever touch his lips for as long as he lived. He clenched his fists. His early years with his father built a lifelong hatred of spirits in him. Before his mother died, his father was a respectable father and ranch owner. His eyes watered as he recalled those early years, before the drinking, beatings, and reclusion started, with a hint of melancholy. That was in the past. Many times, the cowboys that worked with Duke offered to take him drinking budge. It wasn't happening then, and certainly not now. Facing the road, he rode on. The town soon faded behind him, and it wasn't long before he could spot the fencing of his ranch. As he got back, Milo came jogging to him. "You're back, Mr. Warren." Duke got off his wagon. "What's the matter?" "You've got a special visitor." "A special visitor?" "It's your sister, Joan." Duke's eyes widened, and a smile broke on his face. Stepping down the wagon, he handed the reins over to the waiting young man and dashed across the field. The dust had hardly settled when his eyes fell on a familiar figure sitting on the porch next to Hope. His smile widened. He'd recognized that midnight black hair from anywhere. He waited. Hope and Joan were talking with an open warmth, and it seemed like they'd known each other for years. His sister was open, like Hope, so it wasn't much of a surprise. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, laughter punctuating the air as they exchanged stories. Joan's vibrant energy blended seamlessly with Hope's spirited nature, creating an atmosphere of ease and comfort that had been absent in the home for far too long. Their camaraderie formed a bond that was pleasing to the eyes. As Duke observed them from a distance, his heart melted. However, he couldn't stay out of sight any longer. As he got closer, her gray eyes met his. A radiant smile graced her features. Her arrival was unexpected but a welcome surprise. His eyes fell on her bulging dress. It looked like he would be an uncle very soon. "Duke." Duke held Joan in an embrace once he was close enough, even though her protruding belly made it hard. Her grin was infectious, and he began to grin as well. "Howdy, Joe. You know, it's been a while since I last saw you in these parts." She burst into light laughter. It's all Alex's fault. He barely lets me do anything. I can't even go out to see my friends and family because he's always afraid I'll get myself hurt or something. I had to twist his arm so he'd agree to me meeting you today." He chuckled. Alex, Joan's husband, who worked at the timber mill, was a good man, but he was overprotective. Duke could understand why. He did miss seeing his sister, who lived on the other side of town, but he was glad she had a loving and doting husband. Duke's eyes moved to Hope, and he realized they'd almost sidelined her. He smiled. "I see you've met my wife." Joan frowned. "You've gotten me mad plenty, Duke. You couldn't visit to tell me your wife had arrived." "I was planning to at the week's end. I've been busy handling things around the ranch. It's a good thing you're here now, eh?" Her frown disappeared, and her wide smile returned. She stepped closer to Hope. "I've met her. You're a very lucky man, brother. Hope is so cultured and so friendly at the same time. You should hear her stories of the East Coast." This was new. "Your sister is wonderful," Hope quipped in, her lips pulling into a bright smile as well. "We've become close in only a couple of hours." Duke didn't expect Hope to get so close to his sister in such a short amount of time. It was all he could do to keep his lips from falling open. He watched as their conversation drifted to familial ties. Hope inquired about the rest of Duke's family, and Joan's laughter softened. Her gaze flinched before she spoke. She regaled Hope with stories of their childhood, painting a picture of a family once whole, now scattered in time. Duke could still remember everything like it was yesterday, but the memories brought a bitter taste to his tongue. He and Joan had a hard time growing up. After their mother died, they had to endure years under a suddenly drunk and abusive father. Then he died as Duke entered 16, and he had to take over a struggling ranch. Years later, he'd managed to turn their fortunes around. Hope listened with rapt attention, yet his eyes met hers at intervals. There was something in her eyes he couldn't read, and it intrigued him. What was going through her mind as she heard the story of his family? It was late in the afternoon when Hope and Joan went in to prepare dinner together. Duke remained on the porch, staring at the sky as it transitioned from a dark orange to a starry one. Memories of his childhood came to mind, and closing his eyes, he reveled in the good parts. He might have had a rough childhood, but he has his moments with his sister. A soft, warm touch on his arm jerked him to reality. Turning, he met Hope's eyes. "You've been outside all evening. You could catch a cold," he smiled. "I'm okay. Well, you'd better come in. Dinner's ready." Rising, he joined her inside. Dinner wasn't a quiet affair like it always was for Duke. His sister couldn't stop talking and asking questions, and even though it wasn't like him, he entertained them. He didn't have to do much, as Hope carried most of the conversation. After dinner, it was time to say goodbye. Bob, who was about to leave, was to take her home on his way. Joan hugged Hope tight and promised to visit whenever she could. Then she turned to Duke. "Goodbye, brother. Take care of yourself. Also, you've got to treat Hope well. She's good for you. You're not the first person hinting at it. I will. Take it easy, will you? I don't want Alex to have sleepless nights over you." She giggled. "We'll be fine." Duke watched as Joan waved before getting into Bob's wagon. The wagon slowly pulled out of view. After Joan's departure, Hope turned to me. "Joan mentioned that you both loved to go to the waterfall as kids." "Yes," he raised a brow. "Why?" "It reminded me I haven't had the chance to explore the town. Could I still see it with you sometime?" He paused, considering her request. Rainbow Falls was mostly ordinary. "There's not much to see round here," he said, a faint shrug punctuating his words. "The only remarkable thing is the waterfall just outside of town, which she mentioned. That's what gave the town its name. There ain't much else round here that's worth seeing, but that waterfall's something." Hope leaned in, her gaze fixed on Duke's. "Could we go see it tomorrow? I'd love to explore and learn about the history behind it." "Sure thing," he agreed, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We'll head out there tomorrow. There's more to it than just the water. I reckon you might find it interesting." A visit to the waterfall. Why not? Chapter 9. The hours sped by. Hope hummed as she did her chores, her lips curled in a perpetual smile. The evening held promise, and it was just a while away. It was midday, and Hope had already done all she was supposed to. Heaving a deep breath, she wiped away a sheen of sweat that had gathered on her forehead. Duke would be back in a few hours, and they would go see the waterfall. Sinking into a chair nearby, she closed her eyes. The rhythmic drumming of her heart resounded against her ears. Her senses were heightened. Rocking slowly, she began to drift off to sleep. When she opened her eyes, she was in a different place. It was a modest cottage on a busy street with many similar houses and a few large buildings. Children ran across the street as horses drew carriages through, their hooves drumming against the paved roads. The house and the street were familiar. Detroit. Home. What was she doing here? Her steps carried her across the road, moving faster and faster. She stopped at the doorstep. It had been so long since she had been home. She paused. Was this a dream? If she was correct, Mother would be inside. In her early years, it had been just the two of them. She never knew her father, but she never felt less unloved. Her growing years were beautiful, filled with joy and love. It wasn't destined to be that way forever. Taking a deep breath, Hope raised a hand to knock. She paused. Why was she hesitating? After another sigh, she knocked. Come in, dear. I've been waiting all morning for you. It was unmistakable. That low, sing-song voice was her mother's. Stepping in, she glanced around. Her eyes stopped at the doorway to the kitchen. There, in a long velvet dress, with an apron tied around her and her golden hair packed into a bun, was her mother. Hope was speechless. Breakfast is ready. Come on. Her mother extended a hand to her. Let's eat. Hope stepped forward, dragging her feet. When she was near enough, she took her mother's hands. Her mother led her to the dining area, and she stopped in her tracks. Her eyes widened. Sitting at the table was her first husband, Wright. His toothy smile and those spectacles she remembered him for were still there. He nodded as their eyes met, and his grin widened. She couldn't utter a word. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned. It was Duke. Why was he here? She turned to her mother and Wright. Their nods and warm smiles warmed her racing heart. She turned to him and blinked. Slowly, she came into full consciousness. It was a dream. A wistful longing to see her loved ones drifted through her mind. She thrust it aside, willing herself to focus on the present. Her head tilted upward and her eyes met Duke's. Those beautiful blue orbs of his held a warm gaze that kept her in. She couldn't stop staring. Are you fine? You were out like a candle when I came in. Shaking her head, she glanced around. She was still in the living room. How much time had passed? At least, dusk hadn't set in. Her gaze returned to his, and something about him drew her in. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what it was. Was it his handsome face with chiseled features, or the smooth texture of his tan skin, which was exquisitely drawn across his muscles? Or was it his eyes, which seemed to hold her in his gaze like staring at the blue sky would? He raised a brow. Hope? She swallowed. Yes? Are you okay? I'm just fine. She managed a smile. When did you get back? He stood straight. An hour ago. If you want, we can go see the waterfall tomorrow. I don't want you giving your body too much trouble. I'm fine, really. I was just a little tired. Wait here. I'll be right back. Hope waited for Duke as he headed into the kitchen, her eyes following his every move. He mouse. Her mind went back to the dream. It amazed her that she could still remember every detail. What did it mean? Minutes passed, and her thoughts were interrupted as Duke returned with a steaming cup. He handed it over to her. Here, drink this. It's herbal tea. It'll help with the tiredness. Hope tore her gaze from his eyes to the cup, which was almost full of a brownish liquid. Closing her eyes, she took a sip. It wasn't sweet, but it wasn't as bitter as she'd expected either. After a few more sips, she laid the cup down. How are you feeling? Something about Duke doting on her made her nerves tingle. I'm all right now. Can we go? He held his hand to her, and her eyes widened at the gesture. She hesitated before taking it. His thick, weathered hand tightened around hers, sending warmth shooting through her. He pulled her up and, with his hand on hers, led her outside without saying a word. The prospect of discovering the hidden gem nestled just outside their quiet settlement still filled her with anticipation. But Hope's thoughts were centered on Duke. Her gaze remained on his as he led her to his wagon. He helped her up, as he always did, before joining her. They set out on their journey, with the landscape unfolding before them like a canvas painted in hues of golden sunlight. The air was crisp and fresh, and Hope found herself stealing glances at Duke, noting the charm in his quiet demeanor. The journey to the waterfall took them through rugged paths and verdant landscapes. They passed the timber mill just outside a forest, and Hope's eyes remained bulging. This was a part of town she hadn't seen before. The sun had set by the time the mill faded from view and dusk had set in. The distant sound of rushing water was already growing louder. "We're almost there now. Are you ready?" "I believe I am," he smiled. "Don't hold your breath." And as they rounded the final bend, silvery rays spewed through the trees. The rumble of water grew louder. They reached an opening that looked like a riverbank, and there it was, a breathtaking sight that stole the breath from her lungs. At that moment, she understood why Duke had told her not to hold her breath. The waterfall cascaded from a lofty height, its silvery veil shimmering under the gentle caress of the moon's glow. The water sparkled like 1,000 diamonds. This was nature's unrivaled artistry at its best. Getting down from the wagon, she stood in awe. The sight before her was an ethereal spectacle that surpassed any description. "Duke, it's beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rush of the falling water. The brilliant silvery glow painted the scene with an otherworldly radiance, casting a serene aura over the cascading water. Hope couldn't get enough of the scenery. She turned to Duke, who was focused on the scene as well. He glanced at her, a rare softness in his eyes as he nodded in quiet agreement. "Yeah, it is," he murmured, his gaze returning to the waterfall. They found a quiet spot near the water's edge to camp and spread the blankets Duke had carried along. The sound of the waterfall provided a soothing backdrop to their conversation. The stars hung like guardians above them, and their gentle luminescence bathed the duo in a brilliant glow as they settled on the banks. As the evening wore on and the night deepened, their conversation flowed effortlessly, weaving through their lives. Duke grew silent after a while. When he spoke, his voice was more quiet than usual. "I used to come here a lot with Minerva when she was still alive." Hope summoned the courage to ask, "What happened?" Duke spoke of his former wife, a woman he had cherished deeply, and how their bond was forged through shared moments of joy and quiet understanding. He recounted tales of their life together, the memories etched in his heart, and his reverence for a love that had been abruptly torn away. "When she fell ill, I prayed she'd be spared. I couldn't bear to lose her, but," he paused, taking a deep breath, "she left us all the same." A longing pang to hold Duke's hands resonated within Hope as she listened to his stories. She kept her hands to herself. At least she could understand the depths of the loss he had endured. Something pushed her, and she didn't know when she began talking. "I married early, at 19, because that's how things were back in Detroit. Wright was a magistrate, and even though he was almost twice my age, he wasn't like the older men around. He didn't drink or chase after soiled doves, as you call them down here. He was loving and caring, and he gave me so much attention. I felt loved. He also introduced me to high society, and I became a regular. I enjoyed that life." She gazed at the cascading waterfall, memories of her past life returning to her. The words came freely. "Things went well for 10 years, but then Wright fell ill. He died, of course, and it was only after he died that I learned he was in debt. He was beloved in the town, and everyone blamed me for his death. I had to move on from Detroit. It was then that I discovered a newspaper from the far west. That paper has your post in it. It must have been hard." "It was, but I moved in." Her lips curled. "I met you." Silence descended as they sat in the tranquil embrace of the moonlit night. In those quiet moments, under the moon's gentle gaze and amidst the peaceful whispers of the cascading water, a subtle connection blossomed between them. Hope found herself closer to Duke than ever. After a few moments, she turned to him. At that moment, their gazes met. A subtle yearning danced in the air between them. A shared moment lingered. Duke drew closer, and then, in a fleeting second, his lips met hers in a tender kiss that sent sparks flying. But as quickly as it had begun, Duke withdrew abruptly. He stood, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice almost a murmur. Rising as well, Hope gazed at him. Her eyes searched for an explanation, and her heart still pounded. Unanswered questions flew through her mind, but one took hold. Why did he withdraw? What's wrong? She asked, trying to make sense of his sudden withdrawal. It's late. We should head back. Just as soon as the sparks came flying, they fizzled out. Hope nodded. The unspoken tension hung heavy in the air as they made their way back to the wagon. A palpable silence settled between them on their way back to the ranch. Hope's mind raced with a whirlwind of thoughts. She couldn't shake the nagging unease. The fresh memory of Duke's sudden withdrawal lingered, leaving her grappling with unanswered questions. The usually comforting ride was laden with unresolved tension. Soon they were back at the ranch, with the night draped around them like a heavy veil. Before Hope went into her room, she turned to Duke and flashed him a smile. "Thank you for tonight." He returned her smile, but no word came out of his lips. Swallowing past the lump that had appeared in her throat, Hope retreated to the privacy of her room, where she wrestled with her thoughts. Chapter 10. That's enough. Thinking would only get you so far, Duke. Taking another deep breath, Duke repeated those words to himself as he shrugged on a coat. Thinking better of it, he shrugged it back off. He'd be all right in his shirt and leather pants. Glancing at the window, he noticed the morning sun began its ascent above the horizon, casting a warm glow upon the ranch as he prepared himself for the trip to the nearby town. The ranch needed supplies, and idling away with thoughts wouldn't get them. He couldn't help it. His thoughts wandered, lingering on the events of the past week, the shared conversations under the moonlit sky, the intimacy of their shared pasts, and the unexpected kiss that had stirred a dormant longing within him. His breath hitched. That kiss, it had been brief, but it woke something in him. Ever since that day, he found himself more attracted to Hope. A slight, brushing touch here and a smile there only added fuel to the burning flames. He couldn't deny the shift in dynamics between Hope and himself. Over the days that followed, a newfound closeness blossomed in the wake of their shared moments. The seemingly fragile bond forged between them during that time was almost unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. He'd almost forgotten how it felt to have such an attraction blossom. His connection with Hope defied the solitude he had grown accustomed to. Duke sighed before grabbing his hat. Even with his resolve, feelings still blossomed. He raked his hair before fixing the hat firmly atop his head. All was set. Closing his eyes, he uttered a quick grace before heading out of his room and down the stairs to the living room. His eyes were drawn to the bright light filtering through the open kitchen door. That could only mean one thing. Hope was awake. His heart began to throb, and his breath quickened. No woman had made Duke feel this way before Minerva, or ever since. That thought remained in Duke's mind. His preparation done, Duke emerged from his room. In the living room, he came across Hope reading a book. She stood, and the soft morning light framed her silhouette. "Good morning." Her voice carried a gentle warmth that eased the tension within him. He returned the greeting with a nod, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Today's the day I'm heading to town." His voice was steady, despite the turbulence that lingered within him. Hope's gaze flickered, and she raised her brows. "Oh, today? How long will you be gone?" "Not too long." He tried to make his tone reassuring. "I'll be gone for a week at best. I'll get some supplies for the ranch, then head back as soon as I can. I need to be back on time." He didn't know why, but he felt some reluctance about leaving her behind. The surprising sense of companionship they had discovered in each other was precious. He hadn't had it in a while, and the idea of being separated, even briefly, stirred an unexpected sense of longing within him. "Why?" He smiled. "Joan is due soon. I don't want to miss welcoming her child. Also, I don't know why, but I don't want to be away from you for long." "That's a mighty noble reason. I'm sure you'll be back before she's due." "Thank you." Their eyes locked as the room grew silent. In a fleeting moment of instinct, Duke drew closer to her, enveloping her in a warm embrace that spoke volumes in its silent tenderness. She hesitated a moment, and Duke held his breath. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and they stayed that way for a while. He planted a gentle kiss on her lips. Withdrawing, he flashed her a smile, and her face colored. He could read her eyes. "Goodbye, Hope. Take care." Duke's gaze bored into her eyes. "I promise you, when I'm back, we'll quietly celebrate your birthday. It'd be just the two of us." His hold on her lingered for a few moments longer. Then he let go. He lifted a few strands of her hair, then turned and strode out of the house. Bob, who was to accompany him on his journey, was already waiting when he made his way to the wagon. He grinned. "You sure took a while there, Mr. Warren. Sorry about that. Let's go." "Not yet." Bob nudged Duke and pointed to the distance. "Over there." Duke turned. Hope was standing by the porch, her figure silhouetted against the morning sun. She waved at him. Returning the gesture, Duke waved back. His lips turned as he settled into the wagon's driver's seat. He stole one last glance at Hope before spurring his horse on. The wagon set off, leaving behind the ranch and the woman he'd grown close to. Her presence still lingered in his thoughts. The wheels rumbled against the rugged path, carrying Duke and Bob toward town. The cowboy glanced over at him with a twinkle in his eye. "You've been smiling a lot more these days, Mr. Warren. Must be that wife of yours." Duke's response was a non-committal grunt, dismissing any chance of a conversation on that topic. Yet the words lingered in the air. He turned his gaze away, watching the landscape as it passed by in a blur. His mind wrestled with the notion that maybe, just maybe, there was some truth to Bob's jest. The thought seeped into Duke's consciousness, stirring a contemplation he tried to push aside. His relationship with Hope had indeed shifted. It wasn't a mutual agreement of support anymore. The moments they had shared and the quiet connection that had grown between them tiptoed along the lines of a deeper bond. The notion of being truly married came to him, and that thought bothered him. Could he share something more intimate with Hope, even as he'd guarded his heart? Even then, Duke somehow found the idea both unnerving and strangely comforting. Hope had become a steady presence in his life, so wasn't it possible if they shared something deeper? Were they truly a married couple now, bound not just by an arranged union, but by an unexpected connection? He would wait and see where this carried him. If it was something deeper with Hope, then so be it. Chapter 11. Hope swallowed as she straightened her dress for the umpteenth time. She'd taken care to look presentable today and wore one of her best dresses, a green, lace-trimmed gown with embroidery decorations at the front. Even though she looked presentable to her satisfaction, her heart still drummed against her chest. The drone of conversation was already filtering into her room from the living room and the porch, but her nerves still stood on end. Not even deep breaths were helping. Tilting her head back, she smoothed the curls that had escaped her bun. It had taken so long to prepare for the evening, and she hoped her nerves wouldn't ruin it. Why was she feeling that way? Parties had never made her feel nervous before. She wasn't a stranger to socializing, and this party was much smaller in scale than those back in Detroit. Today was her birthday, and even though she wasn't celebrating it, she'd celebrated others with right. What was wrong? She sighed. The answer was obvious. This wasn't Detroit. She was hosting a party hundreds of miles away in the West, on the ranch of someone who wasn't social. No, that was too light. He hated parties. Why host a party on his ranch then? She asked herself that nerve-wracking question once more. What if he got back at that very moment? Calm down, Hope. You're doing this for Duke's family. He'd understand. With those words, Hope drew a deep breath. She would see this night through. She fixed a smile on her face and prepared herself. As she stepped out of her room and headed down the stairs, the buzz of people milling around and the enticing aroma of roasted turkey hit her senses. It was like a Thanksgiving scene back home. No, this is your home now. In a way, this was a Thanksgiving party. The only difference was this party was for Joan, Alex, and their newborn son Cody instead of a favorable harvest. A smile lit her face. She made the right choice. Just a day after Duke left, Joan gave birth. Alex had come over on Joan's behest to deliver the news, and Hope returned with him that day. The sight of Joan cradling her newborn son brought tears to Hope's face. She wished Duke were here to witness it, as he'd wanted. Then came the request. Joan and Alex wanted to celebrate their son's arrival with a party, and Joan wanted it to be at her childhood home. Hope was hesitant at first, knowing Duke's stance on social events, but eventually she gave in. This was family. Surely even Duke would make an exception for that. Even with that, she silently prayed this wouldn't be an issue when Duke returned. Casting aside her thoughts, Hope went about directing the party. It wouldn't have been a success if Joan's close friends hadn't helped with the preparation. She was grateful for that. It didn't fail to occur to her that Joan was different from her brother in many ways. Duke was reclusive and had very few friends. Joan, on the other hand, was outgoing and immensely popular in Rainbow Falls. When Hope had wondered where to get help from, it only took a mention for Joan to reach out to those close to her. Alex himself wasn't left out of the action. Without his muscle, coordination, and leadership, Hope wouldn't have been able to organize things. Hope reached the living room, where a group had gathered around someone playing a banjo and singing an old folk song. She held a hand to her lips when she caught sight of who it was. She never knew Alex had such talents. The rendition ended to some applause and cheers, and Alex stood and bowed. His eyes met Hope's, and a huge grin broke on his face. He headed over to her, giving her another mock bow. "That was some good playing there. I never knew you were good with music." He chuckled. "Why, I'm one of the best in this town, if I do say so myself. How do you think I met Joan?" Hope giggled. It wouldn't hurt to engage the father of the main celebrant for a little while. "I'm all ears." So there I was at this party on New Year's Eve, having a great time with my friends, when I saw this beauty from across the room. Now, mind you, I've seen her before in church, but I never got the chance to talk to her. I wasn't about to let this opportunity slip me by, but I didn't want to go up to her and introduce myself the same way others would. What do you suppose I did? "I don't know. You tell me," she said, already laughing. "Well, I picked up my banjo, walked up to her, and sang her a song I composed right there on the spot. That got her amused, and that got us talking. You know the rest." "That's a beautiful story, Mr. Miller." "Aw, come on, call me Alex." His grin faded, replaced by a small smile. "And now we've welcomed our first child into the world." His smile proved contagious. "Congratulations, Alex. I'm so happy for you." "Thank you. I've got to say, it's such a lovely party you're holding in Cody's name. Thank you so much for that. It wouldn't be possible without you." "You flatter me. You're family, and I didn't do much. You and Joan did most of the work." He crossed his arms and raised a brow, his smile turning into a lopsided grin. "Has anyone ever told you that you're too humble for your own good?" "I can't remember any." Wanting to change the topic, I glanced around. "Where's Joan?" He nodded at the stairs. "She's up there somewhere with the baby. She wanted to spend some time alone with Cody before returning for the big toast. She's probably putting him to sleep." "She must be in Duke's bedroom then." Bidding Alex goodbye, Hope headed up the stairs. When she reached the door of the bedroom, she hesitated before knocking slightly. The door squeaked open and she poked her head in. "You can come in." Hope stepped in, her eyes moving around. Joan was sitting on Duke's bed, humming to her baby. He seemed to be asleep. "Is he fast asleep?" she whispered before setting him down. "It's a pity he can't take part in his celebration. He'll grow soon, and then we could have a birthday party for him. They grow so fast." A smile graced Joan's lips. She stood and walked to the window, overlooking the vast landscape painted by the silvery glitter of the night. "I lived all of my years on this ranch before I met Alex. Even after our parents died, it was all we knew. It was hard to move on when I got married, but I had my life to build. Even with that, this ranch is still my second home. I'm so happy I got to create another beautiful memory here." Turning to Hope, she held her hands. "Thank you, Hope. I'll never forget what you've done." Smiling, Hope gave Joan a reassuring squeeze. "Duke would do the same. Let's go. I can smell the roasted birds from way up here." The two women grinned as they headed out of the room, taking care not to wake the sleeping Cody. As they rejoined the party, Hope's mind went to Duke. She couldn't deny that she missed his company. If only he were here. Chapter 12. Duke heaved a deep sigh as his wagon trudged back into town. The past few days had been hectic. The days seemed to drag on, but it was done. The ranch had the new supplies it needed, and there was something else that got him smiling. Through a coincidental meeting with the manager of the timber mill at the saloon in the next town, Duke had managed to secure some grazing land for his ranch. It was near the ranch, so the long and tiring journeys in search of grass and water would come to an end. His smile widened into a grin that lit his face. He got all that for a bargain. It all ended well. It couldn't have been truer. At long last, it was done. Letting go of the reins for a moment, he stretched. He couldn't wait to get home to a refreshing bath, a warm meal, and some good sleep, and hope. Duke leaned back, his grin returning to a smile. She'd been on his mind more often than not lately. Admittedly, he welcomed those thoughts. Her face was a constant presence in his mind, and a part of him longed to see her in person once more. As Duke rode on, the dust kicked up from his horse's hooves and his wagon's tires blended with the golden hue of the rising sun. There was one last stop for him, the general store. Already, he could catch a glimpse of the store's wooden facade, with the signboard swinging in the midday breeze. He planned to gather some edible and miscellaneous provisions before heading back. He needed to prepare for his quality time with Hope, after all. He'd promised her they'd have a good time when he returned to celebrate her birthday. A moonlight dinner was what he had in mind. He'd made arrangements. Stepping out of his wagon and tying his horse to the hitching post, he stepped inside. The store was busy, and the buzz of conversation hit him as he began to browse through it with his eyes. He nodded at the burly store owner, Mr. Hicks, whose eyes widened. "Well, slap a grizzly. Look who's back. Didn't you head off to Piketown on business?" "I'm done with that, Mr. Hicks," Duke said, chuckling. "Came back early because I had something important to do in town." "I see. Here to pick a few things for the missus?" "I am." "Carry on," Hicks said, nodding. Amidst the stacked shelves and the aroma of dried herbs, a conversation reached Duke's ears as he walked around. Two locals spoke animatedly about a party, mentioning his wife, Hope. He froze, her name catching his attention. He leaned closer until it was just a shelf between him and the man and woman talking. "That was an amazing feast, if I ever knew one." He recognized that voice. It was Gilbert, a close friend of Joan's husband, who worked at the train station. What was he talking about, and why was Hope's name mentioned? "Mrs. Warren does know how to throw a party. I've never been gladder to know Joan than I was yesterday. I heard she handled everything by herself." "That's a surprise. I thought Duke didn't like parties." "Gilbert? Well, this is his wife we're talking about. Does he have a choice?" Was he hearing right? Did Hope throw a party in his absence? He didn't want to believe it. He shook his head before approaching them, his brow furrowing. "What's this about a party, folks?" Duke's drawl made the pair turn to him. He leaned against a shelf, trying to look casual, with his eyes fixed on them. One of them turned to him with a grateful smile. "Why, it's you, Duke. I heard you were out of town. I didn't see you yesterday." Duke forced a smile. "I had some business. I heard about a party on my ranch. You should have been there. Your wife threw the best feast I've ever been to in this dry town. I had such a jolly time over there." The others weren't much, and we all knew each other, but I'd bet everyone was glad it was that way. The man's gratitude seemed genuine, but Duke was taken aback. He struggled to keep his face straight. His smile remained, but with great effort. The news struck him like a bolt. Hope had gone against his wishes and organized a celebration despite his earlier instructions. His swirling thoughts mingled with his tiredness. He had expressly told her he didn't want any festivity for her birthday. Thinking about Hope flouting his decision made him dizzy. All the plans he'd made suddenly disappeared into the wind. As if Gilbert's confirmation wasn't enough, Pamela, whom Duke recognized as Joan's friend, quipped in. "Didn't you say you didn't like parties, Duke? I was very surprised to see such a wonderful party happening on your ranch." He clenched his fists, then shrugged. "If my wife wants to throw one, it's fine with me. I have to go now." "Thank you for such a wonderful time. Please thank your wife as well," Gilbert said, tilting his hat and grinning. Pushing his hat back, Duke bid the two a nod before walking away. "Going already?" Duke stopped just as he reached the doorway. Making an effort to wipe the frown that had appeared on his face, he turned and smiled. "I just remembered there's something I've got to do, Mr. Hicks. I'll be back as soon as I'm done." Mr. Hicks returned to the newspaper he'd been reading. "Okay then, good luck." Duke grimaced, his eyes moving to the paper. It reminded him of how hope entered his life. Without wasting any time, he stepped out of the store. His thoughts swirled as he headed to his wagon. A deep frown clouded his features. Hope had disregarded his wishes and done what she wanted anyway. Even at that, there was a pang of something else beneath it all. A touch of concern for her, perhaps. It couldn't be. As he mounted the wagon and set off towards home, the evening shadows stretched across the trail. The words of Gilbert and Pamela lingered in his mind, bringing a bitter taste to his mouth. What awaited him upon his return? Begrudgingly, he cast it out of his mind. He'd find out when he got home. Duke's stallion sped across the roads, dragging the wagon along with it. When his home was in sight, he tugged at the reins. The horse slowed to a trot, then a canter. He needed to be calm. At the gate, there was no sign of anyone. He'd expected to see a cowboy or two. Putting two and two together, he realized why. They were probably up ahead. The good news would have to wait. It didn't take long for him to get off the wagon and stride to his ranch house as fast as his legs could carry him. When he got in, an inviting aroma hit him. Breakfast. Pie. Willing himself to focus, he entered the kitchen and found Hope by the stove, humming. She stopped and turned. Her warm smile made his resolve falter for a moment, but he kept his brows creased and his lips tight. "You're back." Dropping a pan she'd been holding, she strode over to him and stopped just a few inches away. "When did you get back?" "This afternoon. Is it true?" His voice was cold. Her smile faded slowly. "Is what true?" "I heard about a party, Hope. Did you hold one on this ranch?" She sighed. "Yes, Duke, I did." "I see." She stepped closer. "Believe me, it was only—" He stretched out a hand, intending to keep the space between them. She fell silent, but her eyes pleaded. Duke didn't give her the chance. A part of him wanted to hear her side of the story, but it would only hurt him further. His mind raced with assumptions, but everything led to one conclusion. He was convinced she'd defied his wishes and gone against his straightforward request because she'd wanted to from the start. A memory of Hope spewing hurtful words at him because of his choices came back, and the disappointment he felt transformed into something else. His blood began to boil, and his heart hammered so hard it resounded against his chest. The fire raged out of control. "We were supposed to spend time alone together when I got back. Yet you went behind my back and did what I told you not to do." Her eyes were wet. "I didn't mean to." "What didn't you mean to do? Grab my faith in you and rip it into pieces. Too late. You've gone and done it now." "Duke?" He turned his back on her. When he spoke, his voice had an eerie calm. "We're too different, Hope. When I married you, I hoped we'd be able to live together and support each other like I'd wanted us to. Then you began comparing me to your husband, and I didn't know what to do about that. I couldn't change for you. I was so glad when we moved past that, and I even began to see you as my wife. Being with you was such a pleasure, and I didn't mind spending the rest of my life with you. But now you've shown that's not possible. I don't think we can live together." Facing her once more, his heart stung as tears ran down her face. He closed his eyes and opened them, and his fists balled tight. Hope's lips were parted and trembling. He didn't care if she was as stunned as he was. Hope betrayed his trust. That was all there was to it. "What do you mean?" she asked, stumbling back. His jaws clenched before he spoke. "This marriage cannot work. We're different people with different interests. I want a simple life on my ranch, and you want to have the time of your life. Well, I won't stop you, but I can't be a part of it either. I can't give that to you. We don't fit. That's it." Chapter 13. We don't fit. That's it. Hope's heart raced, her pulse quickening as the air crackled with tension. She never expected the peaceful calm of their home to shatter so abruptly. Where had it all gone wrong? Duke didn't even give her a chance to explain. That was a wild wish. What would she say to appease him? The argument with Duke, with its bitter edges slicing through the tranquility, left her mind reeling. "What? We don't fit." Hope's voice quivered, her gaze fixed on Duke as she pleaded for an explanation. Duke turned away, his shoulders tense and his voice strained. "We don't," he said, the words landing heavily between them. "Maybe it's best if we went our separate ways." The shock of his words hit Hope like a blow. The tears fell freely from her eyes, and the impact washed over her in waves. She staggered backward until she was leaning against the wall, with an ache piercing her deep in her soul. "Please, don't do this." He shook his head. "You did this, Hope. You showed me we can't be together." How would she explain that she held the party for his sister's son? Just trying to make sense of everything made her head feel like it was about to split. She tried to utter words, but they failed to escape her lips. After several tries, she managed to say some words. "I didn't." She paused, trying hard to catch her breath. "I didn't mean to. I only wanted to. That's the problem." He turned to her, waving his arms. "You did what you wanted. You didn't think about us, and you certainly didn't think about me. I told you. I don't hold feasts on this ranch. I've always wanted to live my life without others interfering, and I've been doing that for a long time before you came in. Now I can't have that quiet life anymore because you want something different." It pained her to see Duke this way, breathing heavily and with a deep frown on his face. Before today, she'd never seen him like this. Even when she made the unfair comparison between him and Wright, he'd borne it all with good grace. She respected him for that. What hurt her even more was that he was that way because of her. "I can't give you what you want," he continued, rubbing his temple. "It's best we end this here." She wanted to plead with him and salvage what felt like the crumbling remains of their fragile connection, but she held herself back. Duke remained resolute, his stance unwavering. He wouldn't listen. Without another word, she stood and ambled to the stove. The pie was burning. Lifting the stove off, she turned off the flames. Then, oblivious to Duke's gaze, she walked out of the kitchen. Tears threatened to spill as she retreated to her room, her heart heavy. It happened all too fast. She'd called this ranch home for a short while, but even that wasn't to be anymore. The house that had promised solace and a chance at companionship now echoed with the emptiness of shattered dreams. Fingers trembling, Hope began to pack her belongings into the trunk, a futile attempt to contain the shards of her fractured hopes and dreams. Each item she placed inside reminded her of her dashed expectations. At one point, she couldn't take it anymore and broke down in fresh tears. The future she had dared to imagine with Duke was now disintegrating before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do about it. Time passed. She didn't know how long she'd kneeled by the edge of the bed, crying, but she'd had enough. The once familiar room blurred through tear-filled eyes as she returned to packing, her movements almost mechanical. She made no move to wipe her tears, as the pain still gnawed at her heart. The realization that the life she had started to envision with Duke was slipping away, irretrievable, settled upon her like a heavy shroud. In the solitude of her room, amidst the echoes of her conversation with Duke, Hope wrestled with the anguish that clawed at her soul. She stared at her trunk. The trunk, now filled with the remnants of a future that would never be, stood waiting. Just the sight reminded her that this was the painful end of a chapter she had hoped would bring companionship that'd last. It dawned on Hope that she loved Duke. She'd never loved someone like this before, not even Wright. He was a kind man who provided a comfortable life for her, and she loved him for it. But it hadn't been this deep. The realization made their breakup more painful than it already was, almost unbearable even. But she had to move on. As Hope finished packing, she wiped her eyes. Then she stepped out of her room, trunk in hand. There was no one in sight, and a hollow emptiness echoed within the homestead. She glanced around as she walked around. Duke was nowhere to be seen. The pie she'd made, with its blackened crust, lay on the kitchen table, untouched. Duke's absence lingered like a heavy weight, the lingering silence amplifying the pain in her heart. Carrying her trunk, she emerged into the open. She hoped to catch a glimpse of Duke, but he was nowhere to be found. The sun was high in the sky, its rays beating down on everything in sight. It was already noon. She couldn't even say goodbye. Instead, Bob, the seasoned cowboy from Duke's ranch, stood by the wagon, his weathered features brightened by a warm smile. He lifted his hat as their eyes met. "Hello, Mrs. Warren," Bob said with a nod and a bow. "Can you please tell me where Duke is?" Hope's voice trembled. "He's ridden out to the waterhole nearby," Bob replied, his eyes avoiding hers momentarily before meeting her gaze with an apologetic glance. "He said I should take you to town. Is everything all right? A sigh escaped her lips. She had hoped for a chance to say goodbye and seek some form of closure, but it seemed that opportunity had slipped away. Resigned to the circumstances, Hope nodded and managed a soft, "Thank you, Bob," as she placed her trunk in the wagon with his help. "It's no matter, ma'am." Climbing in, she settled onto the seat. She gazed at the ranch house with its whitewashed walls for the last time. A tear slipped down her eye unchecked as unanswered questions tumbled within her mind. With a spur of the reins and the horse's trot, the wagon began its journey toward town. Her thoughts drowned out the rhythmic drumming of hooves against the earth. She glanced back once, hoping to catch a glimpse of Duke. But the empty expanse behind her offered no solace, just the fading ranch and the whispers of an unfinished chapter. Hope had to grapple with the weight of unanswered emotions all alone on the road ahead. Turning to Bob, she summoned some courage. "Excuse me? Need anything, ma'am? Do you know where I could get some good boarding in town? At least for a while, before I leave town." Bob's brows creased. "You're leaving town?" "Yes." He fell into silence for a few seconds. "I believe I know a place. I've got to say, it costs a pretty penny. Are you sure you want to go for it?" She nodded. "That's not a problem." "All right, then." Bob tugged at the reins. "I know just the place." In the boarding house room, Hope sat amidst the quiet solitude, replaying the recent events in her mind. Thoughts of Duke lingered. They couldn't leave even if she tried. The ache of their misunderstanding had been a constant presence for her for more than a day now. "I'd hope for more." She murmured those words to herself for the umpteenth time, the pain evident in her voice. Throwing her head back, she reflected on the burgeoning feelings she had developed for him. It was unexpected. She didn't think she could fall for anyone so fast and so deeply. In the end, it was possible. Duke's quiet demeanor, his kind-heartedness, and his masculine attraction drew her in like a bee to pollen. She admired and respected the man he was, and eventually, something deeper blossomed. Yet even after all that, they fell apart. But amidst the disappointment, a resolve stirred within her. Brushing away the strands of hair that had fallen against her face, she straightened her posture. A newfound blaze of determination flickered in her eyes. "I can't dwell on what's lost." With a deep breath, she scoured through her belongings. She would prepare herself for the journey ahead. Though saddened by the turn of events, she set her sights on moving forward. She had no choice but to leave behind the chapter that hadn't unfolded as she'd hoped. Fetching some appropriate clothes, she hurriedly dressed. There was one place she needed to be before she could finally move on and close this chapter for good. The walk to the outskirts of town took longer than Hope intended, and it was late in the afternoon when she finally arrived at her destination. Before her was the waterfall in all its splendor. Somehow, she found solace in the familiar serenity, even though she'd been there just once. Sitting by the bank of the tranquil waters, she heaved a deep sigh. Memories of her time with Duke came flooding back. She reminisced about the moments spent here and the conversations, and shared smiles that had once filled her with warmth. The gentle sound of the cascading water provided a comforting backdrop to her thoughts. This was what she needed. She closed her eyes, recalling Duke's stories, his quiet gestures, and the fleeting moments of understanding they had shared in this serene setting. Her skin tingled as the brief kiss they shared replayed in her mind. It was a bittersweet reflection, but she didn't shut out the memories. She welcomed them as they came pouring in. As she lingered by the water, Hope contemplated her next steps. It would be hard to find a way forward after all that had happened, but she hoped to carve a new path for herself beyond the memories she held dear, if only she could see Duke one last time. "Hope," she opened her eyes, that familiar, deep voice. "Duke?" She turned. There he was, heading towards her. He rushed over to her and stopped just inches from her. "What are you doing?" Suddenly, he pulled her into his arms. Her heart began to pound, and a flutter ran through her chest and her belly. What was he doing here? Pulling away from the hug, he looked into her eyes. She waited with bated breath for what he was about to say. She had a lot of questions, but they would come later. She had to make sense of what was going on first. Chapter 14. Duke stretched, slowly blinking into consciousness. He glanced around. The sun was up, its rays filtering through the curtains. Grimacing, he got out of bed. He'd intended to do some chores before the first light, yet here he was, waking much later than he'd planned. A wash would come later. Stepping out of his room, Duke glanced around. A deep, oppressive silence had settled over the house, hitting him as he walked around. Every step on the wooden floorboards seemed like one through the abyss, with their clamping echoes ringing out. Stopping at the kitchen, he sighed. On other mornings, the sight of Hope preparing breakfast or going about her chores would have met him. That thought ignited his memories, and he sat at the table, burying his face in his hands. Ever since Hope left, he hadn't been himself. The silence around the house seemed more oppressive, and his thoughts always rang loud against his ears in contrast. He was used to living alone, so what was different? All this time, he'd shut himself out because of the pain of losing Minerva. At a point, he didn't think he could move on from it. No woman could take his late wife's place, or so he thought. Then came Hope. Like a whiff of fresh air, she breezed into his life and broke through the walls he'd built. He didn't want to grow too close to her, yet it was inevitable. There was a charm about her straightforward personality and, of course, her beauty. The way she stayed true to herself, yet didn't hesitate to help him and make this house more of a home, made him enamored. It didn't matter that she was outgoing, perhaps too outgoing for him. Her care for him and his home opened him up, but what drew him in was her kind nature. The night he met her with his sister only proved that. He'd come to appreciate her kind words, her bright smile, and her good nature over the past few weeks. He clenched his jaws. In the end, they fostered something deep within him, something he didn't think possible after Minerva. Love. In the end, it wasn't enough. A knock on the door distracted him. Straightening himself, he headed over. When he opened the door, a familiar face met his gaze. Her smile was contagious, and his lips broke into a smile. "Joan, what are you doing here?" She wasn't alone. A few meters away, Joan's husband, Alex, was getting off a wagon. His eyes moved back to Joan, and it was then that he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The bump in her belly was gone, and she was holding something wrapped in woolly sheets around her hands. It was a baby. "Is that?" Alex quipped in. "Meet Cody Miller, your nephew." His nephew? Duke's eyes became cloudy, then wet. Joan handed him the young, sleeping child, and he hesitated before accepting her bundle. Cody's peaceful face was lit with a smile so heartwarming it washed away most of the tension that had clouded his days. "Welcome to the world, young Cody. I'm your uncle, Duke." He touched Cody's small hands with a finger, and the baby cooed in his sleep. "I'm so happy you're here." The joy of becoming an uncle was so profound. Duke found it hard to fight back the tears, which threatened to spill over. His heart swelled with happiness for his sister's new phase in life. He turned to Joan and Alex. "I'm very glad you both came. We had to, after what Hope did for us. We were hoping you'd be back home the next time we visited." Joan's eyes scanned her surroundings. "Where is she?" The mention of Hope's name made Duke's heart sink. It took him a few moments to register what his sister said. "She left." His brow furrowed. "What did she do for you?" Joan raised an eyebrow. "Where did she go?" "Out of town." "That's too bad." She turned to her husband. "Napolet, now we won't get a chance to thank her for Saturday's party for Cody." "We can always thank her another time." Alex shrugged, then faced Duke. "When is she coming back?" That question had bounced out of Duke's hearing. His mind was struggling to process what his sister said. What was this about a party for Cody? Wait, did that mean, what are you two talking about? "You mean the party?" Joan giggled. "Can we at least talk about it inside?" Duke, realizing they'd been standing at the doorway since, ushered them in. He handed Cody back to his mother and led them to the living room. Once they were seated, he dove back into it. "What's this about a party?" Joan exchanged glances with her husband. Then she cleared her throat. "When I gave birth to Cody, it was a special time for me and my husband. I heard you were out of town when I visited days later, but my husband and I met Hope. She asked us if we would mark the occasion of Cody's arrival, and we decided to on the day of Cody's baptism. We wanted something different from what you and I had as children." We never celebrated anything special, as you know. I didn't want that for my family. I convinced Hope, who was quite reluctant at first, to let us hold the small feast on the ranch. I wanted to mark the special occasion in the place we grew up. This place still holds fond memories for me, and I wanted to create another. By God, I believe I did. Duke's eyes widened and a chill ran down his spine. He hadn't realized the real purpose behind the celebration Hope had organized. Hope did a lot to make the feast a success. Each time she kept asking us if it would be all right with you. I told her it would. You've waited so long to see your nephew. I only wish you were at the ceremony. It was beautiful. The pieces slowly fell into place as he pieced together the misunderstanding. The party wasn't for Hope's birthday, as he'd thought. The feast was for Cody's arrival? Of course it was. Joan's smile faded. Are you all right? You look pale. Duke jumped to his feet. I've made a grave mistake. His assumption and the rash judgment he'd made because of it had driven Hope away. His breathing quickened as he thought of what to do. His heart sank as the realization dawned that his misunderstanding had driven Hope away. What did you do? Duke couldn't face his sister. He couldn't bear to see the hurt in her eyes when he told them what happened. Hope. I sent Hope away. What? Why? I thought. His voice broke, but he tried again. I thought she threw that party for herself, even though I told her not to. I didn't know. Did you give her a chance to explain? Joan's voice was chillingly calm. No. Hope sacrificed so much for us. She hasn't been with you longer than a month, and she has already done so much. Yet you thought the best way to pay her back was to send her packing, didn't you? Duke turned to face his sister. Joan, She shook her head, then stood and beckoned to Alex. Let's go, Alex. We have nothing else to do here. Wait. Please don't leave yet. He straightened his stooping shoulders. I'll go bring her back. I admit I made a mistake, but believe me, I'll fix it. Joan shot him a piercing stare that made him draw back. You remind me of our father. Those words cut Duke to the core. He bit his lips, his fists balling so tight they ached. He watched as Joan began to walk out with Alex. When they reached the door, Alex held her back. She turned to him and he shook his head. We shouldn't leave yet. Duke is a human. I ain't ever seen a human who hasn't made a mistake before. What he needs now is our love and support. If he's willing to make things right, we should let him. Duke's my brother-in-law, but he's also my close friend. I'm willing to give him a chance. Joan's gaze met Duke's, and his eyes pleaded silently. Sighing, she walked back in. She handed Cody over to Alex and went over to Duke. Bring her back, or you'll never see me here again. I will. Duke dashed to the door, stopped, and turned. I promise. With those words, he headed out. Minutes later, he was at the stable. He straddled his stallion in a hurry and spurred the horse on until it went into a full gallop. His mind raced as he thought of where she'd be. That was when he remembered. Bob mentioned Madame Greta's boarding house the day Hope left. He hurriedly went to find Hope, only to discover she was no longer there. The middle-aged caretaker of the boarding house offered him an apologetic smile, but there was nothing she could do other than tell him to wait. Thanking her, he got on his horse and rode off. He couldn't wait, if only he had listened. As he rode through town, thinking of where she could be, Duke wished he had given her the chance to explain. Hope, the woman he had begun to care for, might be gone for good. Where are you? Where could you be? That was when it came to him. Hope didn't know Rainbow Falls that well, and there was only one remarkable place they'd been to since she arrived. He urged his horse, which had slowed into a trot, forward until they reached the town's outskirts. Duke's heart raced as he arrived at the waterfall, the rushing water masking the tumult of his emotions. He glanced around, and that was when he spotted her sitting by the water. Jumping off his horse, he approached her. Each step he took was heavy, but he forged on. When he was near, he shielded his lips. Hope, she turned, her brows raised. Duke, what are you doing? Following an urge that drove him on, he pulled her into an embrace. He held her close like he never wanted to part from her again. When he pulled away, he struggled to find the words to say. Hope, I'm sorry. Duke's voice wavered, but his gaze remained fixed on her. I misunderstood everything. I was wrong about the party. I was wrong about us. I can't live without you. Hope met his eyes. Duke took a step closer, his heart pounding. I've been a fool, Duke continued, his voice softer now. I care about you, Hope, more than I realized. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You care so much for my family and me, and I didn't see that. Maybe I didn't want to. I know better now. Duke, thank you for giving Joan and her family a pleasant memory they'd never forget. Even I couldn't think of a better way to welcome Cody into this world. You know about Cody now? I do. He tugged at a strand of her hair. Joan visited. She won't forgive me unless I bring you back, but none of that matters. Did you come here because of her? No, I love you, Hope. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and this time as the love of my life. I want so much more for us. Oh, Duke, she wrapped her arms around his waist. I love you too. Holding her face, he leaned in. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their reunion, with the cascading waters serving as the perfect backdrop to a shared love that went beyond mere words. Epilogue. There, Mark. This is your party, so you should be happy. The crying baby in Hope's arms soon calmed down and the weeping subsided. Hope cradled her son, whispering to him as she danced around with him. With light steps and gentle swings, she concluded her little dance. The boy, who was crying just moments ago, was already blinking. Hope smiled. He was falling asleep. She laid him in his tiny crib, stroking his silky strands of hair. Mama loves you, Mark. And she did, more than she could express. He'd only spent 2 weeks in the world, so he couldn't understand. Her smile widened. She had a lot of years to show him. The door opened, distracting her from her thoughts. With it, the faint drone of conversation from downstairs reached her ears. She whirled, then broke into a grin. It was Duke, smartly dressed in a white vest and black trousers. He looked handsome and immaculate, clean-shaven, and with his hair straightened back. There you are. He walked over to her and held her in his arms, and his warm embrace sent shivers through her. I was putting Mark to sleep, she said, reveling in a moment of warmth in his arms. Why? It's his party, after all. Hope giggled. I don't think he likes the noise. That's right, Duke said, chuckling. But it's not just his party. That was when she remembered. The party was also a celebration of their wedding anniversary. It had been a year into their marriage already, and although there had been ups and downs, every moment brought them closer. Wrapping her arms around Duke, Hope leaned closer. She could remain in his arms forever. Everyone's been looking for you, so we can't stay here for long, Duke said, as if reading her mind. Joan can't keep everybody busy for long. She sighed. Let's go join the others, then. Pulling from the hug, she headed for the door. Duke, holding her hand, pulled her back. Not so fast. Didn't you say they were waiting for us? A corner of his lips curled in a smirk. I reckon they can wait just a while longer. What do you have in mind now, Mr. Warren? He pulled her into his arms once more, and his breath so close to her nape warmed her skin. He was right. The guests could wait a while longer. I just wanted to tell Mrs. Warren that I think she's a gift from God, delivered by his hands. I love her so much, and I'm looking forward to spending the rest of my life with her. Oh, Duke, I love you too. Turning to Mark, who was sound asleep, he held the baby's arms. And I love you too so much. Hope noticed there were tears in his eyes. She moved closer to him as he leaned over his son, holding his hand. You'll make a great father. He turned, the tears already falling from his eyes. Do you really think so? She kissed his forehead. I know so. You'll see. Thank you. He stood. Now that it's settled, I believe we can join the others. Don't count on me to say much, though. I still don't know how to handle things like these. Hope smiled. Leave it to me. Soon they'd join the party and have a splendid time with everyone. Yet at that moment, all Hope cared about was being close to her family. That was all that mattered. The end.